Hello everyone, I know you are going to use this video for falling asleep, so before that, like this video, subscribe to the channel and let me know where you are from. Also, what time is it? No one remembers who built the house at the edge of Wicker Hill. Not the town historian. Not the old men who drink in silence at the bar on Main. Not even the trees surrounding it seem to remember when they started bending their limbs away from its roof. But what everyone remembers is this. On the first cold night of every October, a single light turns on in the attic window, and it stays on for 13 days. The house had been empty for decades. Officially. Unofficially, kids dared each other to go in. But most stopped at the rusted gate. Some claimed they heard scratching behind the boarded windows. Others spoke of music playing faintly, old jazz, maybe, or a woman singing through static. And then there were those who didn't speak at all after going near it. They just left town, quietly, without saying goodbye. And when they did speak, it was through letters scribbled at 3 a.m., sent from far away, always with the same line at the end, "Don't go back." Not ever. The house never scared Liam. At least, not when he was a kid. He and his sister Ava had spent entire summers making up stories about it, drawing ghosts in the fogged windows and giving them names. Their father warned them not to get too close. Their mother used to flinch when they mentioned it. But kids don't know real fear, not the kind that settles into your lungs and stays there thick as smoke. Liam was 28 now. Ava was gone, and the house, that goddamn house, was lit up again. He saw it the moment he stepped off the train. A single window glowing like a yellow eye on the hill. Watching. Waiting. The town hadn't changed much. The diner still served watery coffee. The high school was still closed for renovations that would never happen. The sign that once read "Welcome to Greystone," a quiet place to grow, had been spray painted into something less hopeful. And everywhere he went, he got the same look: recognition, then pity. As if people expected him to collapse under the weight of his own name. Ava Calloway, 23. Last seen walking toward Wicker Hill just before midnight on October 12th, 5 years ago. Her voice had been recorded on a voicemail to Liam. 4 seconds long. 2 words: "It's open." They never found her body. Only her shoes, placed neatly on the steps of the house, as if she'd stepped out of them before crossing a line no one else could see. Liam hadn't been back since the search was called off. But this year, on the 5th anniversary, the light came on again. And something inside him, guilt, madness, or maybe hope, told him it was time to go home. He didn't stay at the family house, he couldn't. The dust was thicker than memory in there. Instead, he booked a room above the old bookstore, where the owner had taped cardboard over the attic vent and nailed the basement shut. "Some things don't want to be buried," she said when she handed him the key. It was colder than he remembered. The wind pushed the leaves sideways. On the second night, Liam stood across the street from the base of Wicker Hill and stared up at the house. The light was still on, steady, pale. He knew what everyone said about it. That it was cursed, that it called people to it, that it fed on sadness and memory, and things better left unspoken. But the truth, the part they never said out loud, was that more than a dozen people had gone missing near that house. All in October. All after the light returned. Some said it was coincidence. Some said it was a punishment. Some refused to say anything at all. But Liam needed to know. On the 3rd night, he climbed the hill. It felt like walking through syrup, each step heavier than the last. The wind died the moment he passed the tree line. No birds. No bugs. Just the dry crunch of leaves and his own breath, too loud in his ears. And the house, larger than he remembered. But maybe that was just the way it leaned forward, like it had been waiting for him to come back. The front door was ajar. No footprints in the dirt, no signs of life. But the door, warped and blackened by age, was open just enough to whisper. He reached out and touched it. The wood was warm, Inside, the air smelled like old milk and lavender. Dust coated the floor in thick blankets, yet someone, or something, had walked through it recently, bare feet, small. Leading up the staircase, Liam didn't call out, he followed. Each stair groaned under his weight. At the top was a hallway lined with closed doors, but the footprints led straight to the one at the end. The attic. The one Iva used to talk about. The one that only lit up in October. The door was shut, but the light leaked from underneath. He hesitated, then opened it. It wasn't what he expected. The room was empty. No furniture, no dust, not even cobwebs. Just white walls and a single bulb swinging from the ceiling, casting slow, moving shadows like a metronome counting down something unseen. And in the center of the floor, where the footprints ended, was a shape, a spiral, drawn in what looked like charcoal, or ash, maybe something worse. He stepped inside. The bulb flickered once, then twice. Then he saw it, something scrawled in the corner of the ceiling, nearly invisible in the flickering light. 4 words, written backwards, Shainavar Leftihari. The door slammed shut behind him. He ran to it, grabbed the handle, yanked. Nothing. It didn't even rattle. The bulb above him buzzed louder. Then it stopped swinging. And that's when the whispering started. Not from behind the door, not from under the floorboards, from inside the walls. Voices, dozens, men, women, children, some crafting, all speaking at once, too fast to understand, too loud to block out. Liam dropped to his knees, clutching his head, screaming for it to stop. It did. A single voice cut through the others. Familiar. Sharp. Calm, Ava. Don't move, she said. It sees you now. Liam looked up. The bulb exploded. Darkness swallowed him whole. Silence returned. Then, footsteps. Soft, slow, circling him. Something wet hit the floor beside him. A drop. Then another. Then the smell hit. Copper and rot and something sweet underneath. Like syrup gone bad, he crawled toward the door. Found it unlocked. He flung it open and stumbled into the hall. But it wasn't the same hallway. The wallpaper was peeling. The walls warped. And every picture hanging on the wall had changed. No longer photos of strangers. Now they were all of him. Every age. Every moment. His childhood birthday. His first tooth. Him and Ava at the lake. And at the end of the hall, one last picture. A photo he didn't remember ever being taken. Him, standing in the attic, looking up, eyes wide, mouth open. Behind him, something black, something tall, something smiling. He turned. Nothing. But when he looked back at the photo, the black shape was gone. The house breathed. A door opened by itself. He didn't remember running, but he was outside. The door behind him swung closed, slow as syrup. The light in the attic flicked off, and from somewhere deep inside the house, Ava's voice again. It's open, but not for you. That night, he didn't sleep, and in the morning there were new footprints in the dirt. Small, bare, walking away from the house. But they weren't Ava's, they were his, leading back to town. Except he hadn't taken that path. He looked down. His own shoes, gone. Just socks now, damp, dirty. He ran. Asked the bookstore owner for a mirror. She didn't ask why. When he looked at his reflection, something behind his eyes moved, and smiled. He smashed the mirror. The house had let him leave. But something had followed, and there were still 10 days until the light went out. Liam didn't leave town the next morning. He should have. Any rational person would have packed up, hopped the first train, and never looked back. But something deep in his bones, an itch that wasn't quite fear, not yet, kept him rooted. A sense that whatever had happened in that attic, whatever had whispered to him in the dark, wasn't finished, and neither was he. He stared at his reflection in the broken shards of mirror the bookstore owner refused to clean up. Every piece showed a different fragment of his face. Eyes too wide, lips too pale, skin looking thinner than it had the day before. The bookstore owner watched him from behind the counter, silent. She didn't ask what he'd seen. No one ever did. Not here. Not in Greystone. The town had learned, over generations, that certain questions should never be asked, because the answers had a way of sticking to you, curling around your ribs like vines. By afternoon, the sky turned thick and gray, pressing down on the town with a weight that made the trees lean in closer, as if they too were waiting for something. Liam wandered aimlessly, his hands stuffed in his coat pockets, the cold not bothering him anymore. That was the first thing he noticed. His body didn't seem to feel the same. Not cold, not warmth, not even the pinch of the rock that had been in his shoe for the past half hour. He removed the shoe, dumped it out. Nothing inside. But his foot throbbed like something had burrowed its way in and now refused to leave. At sunset, he returned to his childhood home. He hadn't planned to. His feet just led him there, like they remembered paths his mind had forgotten. The gates squealed on rusted hinges. The porch boards groaned like they were calling his name. Inside, the house was a tomb of photographs and silence. His parents' bedroom door was closed. He didn't open it. Couldn't. He knew what was behind it: dust, regret, and the faint scent of his mother's perfume lingering on a pillowcase, untouched since the night Ava disappeared. He walked past the family portraits in the hallway. Every time he looked at one, his throat tightened. Not from emotion, he realized, horrified, but from a strange pressure, like something inside him didn't want him to remember, like a hand reaching from the back of his skull to press down on certain thoughts. He stood in front of the photo, taken the summer before Ava vanished, their arms slung over each other's shoulders, grinning through sunburns and freckles. But now, the image looked wrong. Her smile had changed. Tilted. Stretched too wide. Her eyes, once hazel, were now a solid black. And her hand on his shoulder. Her fingers were longer than they should be. By at least an inch, he backed away. Fast. When he blinked, the picture was normal again. But something inside him wasn't. That night, the dreams returned. He was in the attic again. But this time, he wasn't alone. Iva stood in the far corner, unmoving. Her skin was wet. Not from sweat or rain, but from something thicker. She didn't blink. Didn't breathe. Just watched. And when he tried to step toward her, his feet sank through the floor, like the wood had become syrup, clinging to his ankles. He called her name. She didn't answer. Just raised one hand and pointed behind him. Liam turned. A mirror hung from the ceiling, floating, not touching anything. In it, he saw himself, but not himself. His reflection was smiling, slow, deliberate. Blood seeped from the edges of his mouth like a secret spilling too fast. His hands were moving on their own, tracing something onto his chest. A symbol. A spiral. The same one from the attic floor. He woke with a scream lodged in his throat. But he didn't wake in his bed. He was in the woods behind Wicker Hill, shirtless, barefoot, mud up to his knees, and carved into his chest, just below the collarbone, was the spiral. Fresh, bleeding, he stumbled back to town at dawn. No one saw him, or pretended not to. The bookstore owner didn't ask when he walked in, shivering and silent, his shirt tied around the wound to stop the bleeding. She only handed him a cup of tea, stared at him with tired eyes, and said, "It's in you now, isn't it?" He didn't answer. Didn't need to. He felt it, a pulse beneath his skin. Not his heartbeat, slower, colder, something ancient and deliberate. Every few minutes it beat once, like something was stretching inside his chest, pressing outward. And with every beat, his vision blurred a little more. His thoughts grew a little foggier, until he could no longer remember what Ava's laugh sounded like. And that terrified him more than anything else. He needed help. There was one person in Greystone who might know something. Someone who had survived the house. Clara Breen. She'd lived on the same block as the Callaways for decades. A retired schoolteacher, mostly forgotten by the town. But everyone knew one thing about her. She was the only person who had entered the Wicker Hill house and walked out the same night. She had been 16. No one ever learned what she saw. She never married. never left town, never turned on a single light in her home after sunset. He found her in her garden, clipping dead roses with scissors that looked older than her bones. She didn't look surprised to see him, didn't even turn around when he called her name. "You went in," she said, her voice dry as leaves. "And it saw you." Liam nodded. "You shouldn't have come back," she whispered. "I didn't have a choice," he said. "No," she agreed. "You didn't. That's how it begins." He stepped closer. "What is it? What's in that house?" Clara finally turned. Her eyes were pale and cataracted, but focused. "It's not the house," she said. "It's what lives between the seconds inside it. It wears the house like skin, like a costume. But it's older than any building, older than the town, maybe older than time." Liam felt the pulse in his chest again. The spiral throbbed. "It called Ava," Clara said. "Same as it called you. Same as it called me. But you got out." Clara looked at him then, really looked. "Did I?" she asked. "I haven't slept since." "Not really. Haven't felt the sun on my face in 50 years. Haven't touched another person without their skin turning cold. That thing marked me, just like it's marked you." He pulled aside his collar, showed her the spiral. Clara nodded. "You have 13 days, she said. "That's how long the light stays on. That's how long it needs to shift." "To what?" "To wear you." The air went still. "Every year, it chooses someone. It tries them on like a coat. Sometimes it likes the fit. Sometimes it doesn't. If it does, you vanish. If it doesn't, it spits you out. But you're never the same. It keeps a peace." Liam stepped back. "How do I stop it?" Clara leaned in. "You can't." "But Ava, she's still in there." "I heard her. She's not your sister anymore," Clara said. "She's a voice in the dark. A memory wearing skin. And if you go back in, she'll make you stay." The sky cracked with thunder. Liam turned to leave. "You'll go back," Clara called after him. "You'll have no choice. And when you do, don't listen to the whispers. That's how it finds you. That's how it learns your name." That night, Liam sat in bed, clutching his journal, writing Ava's name over and over so he wouldn't forget it. But every time he blinked, the letters twisted, curled. The A became a spiral. The V melted into a smudge. By morning, the page was blank, and on his chest, the spiral had grown. Now, it pulsed with every breath. And when he stood in front of the mirror, he no longer saw his own eyes. Something else was staring back, smiling, waiting. By the time the 7th day came, Liam had stopped pretending everything was normal. He didn't eat, didn't sleep. The pain in his chest had gone numb. Not because it healed, far from it. It was because it no longer felt foreign. The spiral, once a wound, now seemed to move with him, like it had settled into his body and made a home there. Each morning, it throbbed in perfect time with the light from the attic window on Wicker Hill, which still glowed like a beacon through the thick October fog. Some nights he thought he could see shapes moving behind the glass, tall and slow, like something pacing just beyond sight. Liam began to lose time. He'd look at the clock and it would read 2:13 a.m. He'd blink. Then suddenly it would be 6:40 p.m., and he'd be standing on the edge of town, fingers muddy, breath visible in the air like steam. Once, he woke up in the basement of the school, wrapped in an old theater curtain, surrounded by dead mice arranged in a perfect circle. Another time, he found himself carving spirals into the underside of the diner's counter, the waitress staring at him in silent horror. She didn't call the police. No one did. Greystone didn't involve outsiders when things got like this. They knew better. And Liam, whether he liked it or not, was now part of the pattern. He kept hearing Ava's voice in places it didn't belong. On the radio, buried in static. In the sound of the wind through the trees. Even in his own dreams, she'd sit in corners of dark rooms and mouth words that never made a sound. Once, she reached out and touched his face in the dream, and when he woke up, there was a handprint burned into his cheek. The skin peeled the next day. Underneath, it wasn't bruised or bloody. It shimmered, faintly, like something under his skin was glowing. He tried telling someone. Anyone. But the words would never leave his mouth. It was like his voice was being choked at the last second, sucked into the same place his time kept vanishing into. Eventually, he stopped trying. The worst part came on the night of the 7th day, when he noticed something new about the light in the attic. It wasn't flickering anymore. It was pulsing. Slowly, rhythmically, like a heartbeat. The same pace as the spiral in his chest. And that's when he heard the door. Not the front door. Not the attic. No, this door was deeper. Lower. And it wasn't in his house. It was under it. He first heard it while lying on the floor, staring at the ceiling, trying to stop the shaking in his hands. A soft thump. Then another. Dull, deliberate knocks coming from the floorboards. He pressed his ear to the wood and nearly vomited. Not because of what he heard, though that was bad enough, but because of what he felt. There was something breathing under the house. Something massive, something old. The knocks became more urgent. 5 in a row. Then silence. Then 5 again. Over and over. He couldn't ignore it. The basement in the Calloway house had been sealed for years. After Iva disappeared, his father had boarded it up, hammered nails into the door, and painted over the frame like it had never existed. When Liam asked why, his father simply said it doesn't sleep quietly anymore. But now it was awake. Liam tore the boards down. Splinters stabbed his palms. The air behind the door was warm and thick, like someone had exhaled into the walls for years. The knob turned too easily. The stairs creaked under his weight. Dust fell in slow curtains. The smell hit him halfway down, earth and mildew and something worse beneath it. The air tasted iron, rich, metallic, like old blood in the back of his throat. The basement was bigger than he remembered. Too big. Far wider than the house should allow. The walls curved in odd directions, as if space itself had been stretched to make room for whatever this was. And in the center of the room, built into the floor, was the door. It wasn't made of wood or metal or anything he could name. It shimmered, like oil on water, and it throbbed, pulsed like it was alive. The spiral was carved into it, massive, deep, moving. It was Ava's voice that pushed him forward. "I'm underneath," she whispered. Not from the door. Not from the walls. From inside his own head. He fell to his knees before it. The floor was warm, then cold, then warm again. The door didn't have a handle, but it had a seam. He touched it. The door pulsed, and he saw her. Not Ava as she had been, but Ava as she was now. Her eyes black pits, her smile too wide, jaw unhinged. Her hair moved like it was underwater, floating in slow motion. Her hands stretched into the dark, nails like needles, arms too long. She spoke, but her mouth didn't move, and her voice came from inside him again. "You opened the way." He staggered back. The door began to rise, not open, rise, like it was peeling itself from the floor, and something behind it moved. A shape, huge, shifting, watching. It didn't speak. It didn't need to. The pulse in Liam's chest grew faster, harder. The spiral burned with heat, white, hot under his skin. He screamed, tore at his shirt, scratched at the mark until his nails broke. But it was no longer a wound. It was a window, and something was looking through. He turned and ran, up the stairs, out of the house, down the street, into the woods. The light in the attic was blazing now, no longer soft and yellow. It was white, blinding, almost holy. But there was nothing holy in that house, not anymore. In the woods, Liam collapsed beneath the tree where he and Ava used to build forts in the summer. He curled up, trembling, waiting for the shaking to stop. That's when he saw the others. Figures standing between the trees, dozens of them. Not ghosts, not people, something in between. They watched him, and one by one, they raised their hands. Each had the spiral carved into their palms. He knew then he wasn't the first. He wouldn't be the last. But he might be the one to open it fully. Back in the house, the attic light went out, and under the floor, the door finally opened. Liam woke with a mouth full of dirt and the distinct feeling that something had crawled inside his ear during the night. The trees above him whispered in a voice just beyond his understanding, like wind moving through rusted pipes. His body ached, not from sleep, but from a weight that wasn't there the day before. A pressure inside his skin, like his bones had been rearranged in the night and put back together almost right. Almost. He sat up slowly, blinking against the weak morning light. The air was sharp with the scent of pine and something deeper. Wet stone, burnt copper, and a hint of rotting apples. For a few minutes, he thought he'd dreamed it all. The door beneath the house, the voices, the spiral. But then he felt it again, the pulse, steady, rhythmic, like a second heart blooming in his chest. And then came the realization that broke him a little more. The day before was the 8th. There were only 5 days left. He staggered to his feet and began walking. His shoes were gone again. His feet, scraped and bleeding, didn't seem to feel the pain anymore. He passed through Greystone like a ghost, unnoticed and unspoken to. The town was quieter now, almost reverent. Windows were covered. Shops closed early. The few people still outside crossed the street when they saw him coming. They knew what he was becoming. Knew that once marked, he didn't belong to the world above ground anymore. Back at the bookstore, the door was locked. A sign had been taped to the glass that read Silo Sidurn TTHE Dar PSES. There were no lights on inside, no movement. He didn't knock. He didn't need to. They were hiding from him, and maybe they were right to. That night, he dreamed again. But this time, it wasn't Ava he saw. It was 13 eyes. They hovered in the dark, arranged in a perfect circle around him. No body, no mouth. Just eyes, human, animal, insect. Things he couldn't name. Staring. Blinking out of time, like they didn't follow the same rules of reality he did. They blinked, and the air shifted. Blinked, and he was underwater. Blinked, and he was in the attic again. They weren't watching him. They were reading him. Studying. And when they spoke, it wasn't through sound. It was through feeling, like an idea drilled directly into his spine. You were born for this. He tried to scream. Couldn't. The air had gone thick. You are the lock and the key. He ran, but his legs didn't move. The dream had him now. You will open the mouth of the house. You will let us through. He woke in the street, naked, in front of the town library, covered in dirt and blood and spiral carvings he didn't remember making. Someone had drawn symbols around him in chalk. Salt had been poured across his chest, a barrier. Someone had tried to stop whatever was happening to him. But it hadn't worked. He could feel it inside him now, curled at the base of his spine, whispering up into his skull. A presence. Not Ava, something deeper, something older. It showed him flashes of Ava screaming beneath the floorboards, of hands pulling her down, of her skin peeling like paper, of her eyes bursting like overripe fruit in the dark. It showed him her final thought: you should have come sooner. He vomited in the gutter, the bile thick and black. People watched from behind curtains. No one helped. On the 9th night, the sky turned the color of bruises. A static hum buzzed through the air, like invisible wires had been strung across the town. Dogs barked until they tore their own throats. Lights flickered in perfect time with the attic glow on Wicker Hill. Everything was sensing, aligning. Liam wandered back to the Calloway house, the drawn like a moth to fire. The door was open again. The basement waited. But this time, the spiral on the door had spread, etched itself across the walls, up the staircase, into the very bones of the house. It pulsed when he passed, welcomed him. The basement stairs felt shorter now, or maybe the space below had grown again. The strange door had vanished. In its place stood a mirror. No frame. Just glass, suspended in the middle of the room, hanging on nothing. The reflection showed not the basement, but the attic. And in the attic, Ava, or what was left of her. She turned slowly in the mirror. Her skin was gray, stretched tight. Her hair floated as if underwater. Her eyes were gone, sockets weeping black liquid that hissed when it hit the floor. Her mouth was wide. Too wide. She spoke, but not with words. Her voice bled into him. "You're almost ready." He reached toward the mirror. Touched it. It felt like ice. Suddenly, the image in the mirror shifted. Now it was him, standing in the attic, smiling. But he wasn't smiling now. The reflection was moving on its own. The reflection raised its hand, traced a spiral in the air. Liam felt it cut into his chest again, fresh and hot. Blood poured down his stomach. The reflection's eyes opened wide, revealing nothing but white. Then the mirror shattered. The explosion of glass was silent. It froze in midair. Time held its breath. Each shard reflected something different. Not himself, not Ava. Other things: eyes, teeth, claws, mouths that never closed, shadows with fingers, bodies twisted into impossible shapes. Each shard a window into something not made for this world. And then the glass fell. The moment they hit the floor, the house groaned. Wood split upstairs. Something heavy moved. Doors slammed. The attic light went out again. Liam ran. But he didn't make it far. He collapsed on the porch, his hands covered in blood that wasn't his. The trees around Wicker Hill shifted closer, as if leaning in to hear what he might say. But Liam said nothing. He lay there until morning, and when the sun rose, it was black. The day had died before it began, and inside him the spiral pulsed once, long and deep. Something had crossed over, and it had come wearing his face. By the 10th day, the sun no longer rose. Not really. The sky lightened, yes, but not with gold or warmth. It glowed a sickly gray-green, like light filtered through algae. Birds stopped singing, the wind died, and in Greystone, silence reigned. Not peaceful silence, but the kind that pressed against your skull and whispered things too soft to hear, too dark to ignore. People no longer walked the streets. Doors were locked, curtains drawn. And Liam, once a son of the town, now roamed like an open wound. He couldn't go inside his childhood home anymore. Not because it scared him. Fear had long since rotted into something heavier, but because it had stopped recognizing him. The front door wouldn't budge. The windows reflected not his face, but versions of it, distorted and hungry, mouths smiling where eyes should be. The attic light still pulsed, but slower now, as if counting down. Like a dying star, the spiral on Liam's chest had grown again. It now touched his neck, one tendril curling around his collarbone, the skin beneath it, darker, tougher, no longer entirely his. It didn't bleed when he scratched at it. It hissed. He'd woken that morning to find symbols drawn in ash around his bed. Circles within circles, each one shifting when he blinked. Someone had drawn them while he slept, or something. Maybe even himself. He no longer trusted his memory. Time moved sideways now. Days looped, hours skipped. Once, he stood in the middle of Main Street at midnight and watched a procession of shadowy figures march silently toward Wicker Hill, each carrying lanterns that held no flame. He blinked. They were gone. But the scent of burning teeth lingered for hours. It was on this day, this lightless, colorless 10th day, that Liam first saw the man made of smoke. He was standing by the church, which hadn't opened its doors in years. His back to Lam, coat long and tattered, shoulders hunched. No footprints in the dust, no breath in the air. Just the suggestion of a person, flickering slightly, like static on an old screen. Liam approached cautiously, not because he feared the figure, but because every part of his body was suddenly screaming not to. The man turned before Liam spoke. His face was wrong. Not grotesque, not monstrous, just blurred. Like a memory Liam couldn't quite bring into focus. A face glimpsed once in a dream, or through fog on a window. His features shifted as he stared, never settling. But the voice was clear, and it carved itself directly into Liam's chest, as if bypassing his ears entirely. "You're opening it too early." Liam blinked. "What?" The man stepped forward. His form wavered, as though smoke held together by sheer will. "You were meant for the 13th day." But the door grows impatient. It remembers hunger. Liam backed up. Who are you? I was the last. The last what? Key. Liam's spine went cold. Was she? She was a mistake, the man said. She was strong, but not hollow. Not enough. It left her screaming under the wood. Liam's throat tightened. She's still alive. Parts of her, the ones it liked. He wanted to run, to punch the man, to collapse into the dirt and scream. But he did none of those things. Instead, he whispered, "Why me?" The man tilted his head. "Because you already died, a long time ago." Liam froze. "What are you talking about?" The man stepped closer. This form flickered again, this time briefly revealing bones beneath the smoke. When she vanished, part of you followed. That's what the door looks for. The broken ones. It doesn't take the strong. It takes the hollow. "I'm not hollow," Liam said through gritted teeth. The man leaned in. "You're nothing but hollow." Liam lashed out, his hand cutting through smoke. The figure vanished like breath in winter air, but the message remained. He was already open. He didn't go back to the house. Not yet. Instead, he walked, for hours, through woods that no longer felt like home, past streets that bent in the wrong direction. Once, he saw a child standing in the middle of the road, staring at the sky with empty sockets. When he turned around, the child was suddenly behind him, whispering a lullaby with no melody. He screamed. It didn't help. Everything was shifting, unraveling. Reality had begun to thin around the edges. That night, he stood beneath the hill again. The attic light throbbed slowly. But something else was different. There was smoke leaking from the windows now. Thin at first, then thicker, oily, black, alive. It poured down the walls, crawled across the lawn, pooled in the roots of trees that shook without wind. The front door creaked open, of its own accord, not with violence, not with menace, but with invitation, like it knew he was coming, like it had always been waiting. Liam stepped onto the porch. The boards didn't groan this time. The house was quiet, listening. Inside, the walls had changed. They breathed now, literally inhaled and exhaled. The wallpaper twitched. The spiral had spread across every inch of surface, not painted, grown, like veins. The basement door no longer existed. It had become a mouth. Teeth lined the frame. Pulsing gums of rotted wood throbbed at the edges. The spiral at the center spun slowly, drawing him in. And from deep below he heard her, Ava, crying, not words, just sound, raw, human, terrifying. He stepped forward. The house moaned, and the door swallowed him whole. Liam didn't fall. He didn't descend stairs or drop into a pit. The mouth of the house swallowed him whole, and then there was only darkness, thick, wet, and breathing. The kind of black that felt solid, like flesh pressing against your skin from all directions. It smelled like basements that had never seen the sun and hospital rooms left to rot. At first, there was no sound, no sensation. Just the awareness that he was somewhere beneath the house, but not within any space that belonged to the world above. Then, a sound, slow, dragging footsteps, somewhere to his left, echoing like they were moving through a cavern far larger than the foundations of any house should allow. Liam turned, but there was no light. Just a low red glow that began to bleed in from the cracks in the floor beneath his feet. Cracks that hadn't been there a second ago. The glow grew steadily until he saw where he stood. A hallway. Familiar and completely wrong. It looked like the upstairs hallway of his childhood home, but stretched out, endless, warped. Doors lined both sides, too many to count, and each one throbbed faintly like a heartbeat, breathing in rhythm with the spiral on his chest. He took a step forward. The air got colder, denser, and the floor seemed to move subtly beneath him, like skin shifting over muscle. He reached the first door, hand trembling, and opened it slowly. Inside was Ava's bedroom, but not as he remembered it. The walls were covered in old photographs, hundreds of them, all of Liam's face. Some taken from impossible angles. Him asleep in bed, brushing his teeth, even standing at the foot of this very door. Others from moments he couldn't place. In several, he wasn't alone. A tall, black shape stood just behind him, half hidden in shadows, its face always smeared with motion. Some photos were recent. One had been taken only hours ago. He wore the same torn shirt, the same dried blood under his nose. He backed out quickly and slammed the door shut. The hallway hadn't waited for him. It had shifted, bent. The walls were closer now, the ceiling lower. The lights, if they were lights, flickered with a rhythm that matched the pulsing spiral under his skin. He kept walking. The next door was warm to the touch. It whispered. He opened it. Inside, the spiral, not carved, not painted, but alive. It floated in the center of the room, vast and writhing, an impossible structure made of smoke and bone and ash. Limbs hung from it, human, or once human, twitching slightly. Some reached toward Liam as he stepped in. He recognized the shapes of faces trapped in its folds. One of them was Ava. Another was his father. Himself. They didn't speak, but their mouths moved, soundless. Their eyes followed him, unblinking. He closed the door and vomited against the wall. The hallway pulsed again. He felt it. Like the house was excited now, its hunger stirred. The next door he passed began to shake, then bang, hard. Something inside it was trying to get out. He didn't stop. The hallway stretched. Or maybe it looped. He couldn't tell anymore. The spiral on his chest burned like fire. He could feel it reaching deeper into him, digging toward something that had always been there, hidden beneath memory and denial. Eventually, he reached a door unlike the others. It was wood, plain, unmarked, and it was cold. So cold, the air around it froze his breath. He opened it. The room beyond was empty, until it wasn't. He blinked, and Ava was there, curled on the floor, shaking, wrapped in her old red hoodie. Her face was her own. Her eyes were hazel. She looked up and saw him, and her mouth trembled. "Liam," she whispered. His heart stopped. "Ava," she stood. Tears ran down her cheeks. She stumbled into his arms, cold and trembling. "I didn't mean to open it," she sobbed. "I thought I was helping. I thought I could make it stop." He held her, hands digging into her back, needing her to be real, to be her. "It's okay. I'm here now. We'll fix this, we'll—" She pulled back. Her eyes were wrong. Not black. Not monstrous. Just vacant. "You're not supposed to be here yet," she said. The lights went out. The door slammed shut behind him, and the walls began to shift. They bent inward, forming shapes, faces, mouths, all whispering in chorus. Not words, but a vibration that rattled Liam's bones. Ava stepped back into the center of the room. She smiled, and then she split. Her mouth tore at the corners. Her skin peeled like paper left in the rain. Beneath it was something tall, thin, and glistening, wrapped in folds of itself, like a cloak of skin worn inside out. "You opened the wrong door," it hissed. Liam ran. The hallway had changed again. Now the walls screamed. The ceiling bled. The floor dragged at his feet. He ran through endless doors, each one leading back into the hallway, each time darker, narrower, closer. He screamed until his throat tore, but the only answer was the growing presence behind him, getting closer, humming with anticipation. Then, without warning, he stopped. The hallway ended. A final door stood before him. It was red. Carved into it, deep and still wet with something that looked like blood, was the spiral. His spiral. It matched the one on his chest exactly. He didn't want to touch it. But he had no choice. His hand moved on its own, and as his fingers brushed the wood, a voice, not Ava's, not his own, whispered directly into his mind. "Open and become." The door creaked. And the light that spilled out was not from this world. Liam had seen nightmares, real ones, not just the trembling kind that dissolve with sunlight. But nothing prepared him for what lay beyond the red door. The light that poured out wasn't white, or yellow, or even red. It was the color of bone soaked too long in blood. It had weight, like fog that clung to your lungs, pressing into every breath. It didn't just light the space. It changed it, bent it, made it move. The walls breathed. The air vibrated. The floor pulsed with the rhythm of something enormous just beneath the surface, as though a heart the size of the house itself was buried in the stone and had just begun to wake. And there, in the center of it all, was the hollow place. It wasn't a room, not really. Not in any sense that belonged to the waking world. It had shape and size and gravity, but not consistently. The corners shifted when you looked away. The ceiling moved upward or downward depending on your heartbeat, and the spiral, the cursed spiral, was everywhere now. It floated in the air, it oozed along the floor. It was carved into every surface and etched into the backs of Liam's eyelids. He couldn't step back. The door behind him had vanished the moment he crossed the threshold. There was no handle, no seam. Just smooth wall, rippling with heat. In front of him, the spiral opened. It didn't turn or spin. It opened, like a wound. A tear in the air, splitting wider as he approached. From within it came the sounds of voices, laughter, weeping, static, and a high-pitched hum that set his teeth on edge. It was familiar, intimate. He knew those voices, because they were his. All of them. A dozen versions of himself, some whispering, some screaming, some begging. "You never left," one said. "We've been waiting," said another. "You're the one who opened it," whispered a third. "You always open it." And then came the worst voice of all, his mother's. "Why did you leave her?" Liam fell to his knees. The room seemed to close in around him. The walls thickened, the floor grew soft and sticky, like tar pulling at his hands. Images spilled across the shifting surfaces. Memories, real and broken. Ava as a child, chasing him through the fields behind the school. The two of them huddled in a pillow fort, telling stories about monsters in the dark. Ava older now, standing in the attic window, staring into nothing. Ava the night she disappeared, turning toward the woods, smiling faintly, and whispering something he never heard. It was too much. He screamed. But even his scream was stolen, swallowed into the spiral. Then the spiral cracked. A single line split down its center, jagged and wet, like an eye opening for the first time. From within it came movement. Limbs, maybe. Tendrils. Fingers made of shadow and bone. They reached into the room, curling toward Liam like they remembered his shape. "You were always meant to come back," the voice said again. "You are the hollow." The tendrils touched his skin, and he changed. It wasn't pain. Pain would have been a mercy. This was removal. His thoughts peeled back, layer by layer, as if something was reaching into his mind and scraping out anything that made him him. He saw his name split apart, his memories with Ava rewound and reversed. His father's face melted into static. His body trembled, but not with fear. With understanding, he was a door. He had always been a door. Born broken, made to be opened. The realization hit like a blade. That's why the house wanted him. That's why the man of smoke had warned him. He wasn't the chosen one. He was the tool. And now the hollow place was using him. The spiral in his chest ignited, red and searing. He screamed as it peeled open, not just on the surface of his skin, but inward, deep into his core, like a mouth widening inside his ribs. Something poured from it, light, dark, sound, memory, all twisted into a single pulsing thread. The tendrils grabbed it, fed on it, and in return they offered something, a trade. Not salvation, not peace, Eva. She stepped through the spiral, not crawling, not twisted, whole, unchanged. Eyes hazel, face young, she smiled, and Liam wept. "Ava," he whispered. She touched his face, and for a moment it felt real, like it used to be. Her hand was warm, her eyes kind. Then she leaned in and whispered into his ear, "This isn't me." He froze. "It wears me." He looked again. Her skin was too smooth, her movements too perfect, her smile too still, and her eyes, no longer hazel, black, bottomless. The tendrils wrapped around his legs, dragging him toward the spiral. The thing in Ava's skin stepped aside. "Time to go back," it said. He fought. Not physically. That was pointless. He fought with memory, with himself. He reached into the places they hadn't scraped clean yet, the laughter, the grief, the guilt, and held. clutched them like barbed wire, refused to forget, refused to open. The spiral flared, furious. The room convulsed. The hollow place shrieked. And Liam did the only thing he could. He pulled the memory of Ava, the real Ava, into focus. Her voice, her laugh. The way she kicked her feet when she got excited. The dumb songs she made up. The way she cried at commercials. The smell of her shampoo. The warmth of her hugs. And he shoved that memory directly into the spiral. It screamed. The tendrils recoiled. The false Ava's face cracked, peeling like old paint. Liam stood bleeding, broken, but himself. And for a moment, the hollow place faltered. The spiral dimmed. The wound began to close, but not fast enough. Behind him, the red door began to return. A way out. He ran. The tendrils lashed out, but missed. He reached the door, threw it open, and stepped through into fire. Liam expected pain, expected his skin to split, his lungs to collapse, his blood to boil. Fire wasn't supposed to forgive. It wasn't meant to feel like breath. But this fire did. It welcomed him, embraced him. And as the red door slammed shut behind him, the flames curled inward, not to consume, but to carry. He floated, not through air, but through memory, suspended in a sea of burning recollection. Every flame he passed whispered something familiar, old, buried. The fire was not destruction. It was remembering. He saw himself as a child, standing at the top of Wicker Hill, clutching Ava's hand, both of them daring each other to take a step closer to the forbidden house. They didn't. Not that day. But even then, the house had watched. He saw his mother praying at night, mouthing words not from scripture but something older. Her eyes flicking toward the attic, as if afraid it could hear her through the walls. He saw his father drinking alone in the garage, whispering, "It's never really gone." And he saw Ava, the night she disappeared, walking not in fear, but in certainty, barefoot, eyes glassy, following a trail of whispers only she could hear. The fire wrapped around him, pulling him faster. Scenes blurred. He was in the hallway of the old house again, but different, intact, clean, like a memory preserved in amber. The air smelled like dust and lemon polish. He walked forward, footsteps silent. This version of the house wanted to be seen, to be understood. Then, ahead of him, the walls opened. No door, just parting, and beyond, a circular room he'd never seen before, though every part of it felt right, like it belonged, like it had been waiting for him all his life. 13 mirrors hung on the walls, evenly spaced, tall and narrow. Each one showed not his reflection, but moments. Not just his life, but his choices. The ones he made, the ones he didn't. Each version of himself in a different place, a different outcome. In one, he pulled Ava back from the hill. In another, he never returned to Greystone. In yet another, he opened the attic door with a smile. He approached the nearest mirror. His reflection blinked first, then it stepped forward. The mirror rippled as the other Liam emerged. Same face, same body, but eyes that burned with light. The reflection smiled sadly. "You burned too early," it said. Liam stepped back. "What is this place?" "The fire remembers," the other Liam said. "It's where the house keeps the ones who tried to fight it. The sparks that slipped free. You're not the first." "Then why am I still alive?" The other Liam reached out. "Because you haven't chosen yet." "Chosen what?" "To stay lit," he said, "or to be swallowed." Liam looked around. Each mirror now shimmered. Behind the glass, he could see shadows gathering, versions of himself twisted, monstrous, feral. In one mirror, he saw a Liam with no eyes. In another, one with a spiral carved so deep into his body that it glowed from within. All of them stared, waiting. "I want Ava back," Liam said. "The real her." The reflection's face grew grim. "She's been eaten, Liam. Cheat into memory. What's left? It wears her smile." "I've seen her," Liam whispered. "Felt her." "You felt the part it wanted you to," the reflection replied. "The house doesn't just haunt, it learns. It remembers your grief, your guilt. It's building something from your sorrow." Liam clenched his fists. "Then I'll tear it down." The reflection tilted its head. You can't destroy the house. Why not? Because it's you. Liam's chest went cold. What? It's built from the hollows inside us, from generations of pain, grief passed like inheritance. Wicker Hill is just the skin. You are the bones. No, it needs a door, a keeper. A spiral to spin it forward. You are the next. Liam turned to run, but the mirrors closed in. The fire brightened, and the reflection grabbed his wrist. You still have time, it whispered. One choice remains. Liam tore free. The room caught fire, not in heat, but in memory. His skin flickered with images. Him and Ava. The day their father died. The last time they laughed. The first time he let the light in. The spiral burned brighter on his chest, pushing outward. But now he didn't scream. He understood. He wasn't meant to destroy the house. He was meant to starve it. It needed grief, pain, suffering. He had to deny it those things. The fire roared, and a door opened again, this time not red, but pale white, silent, waiting. Liam walked through, and came out into the attic, the real attic, dust on every surface, no spiral, no pulsing light, just the soft creak of the house breathing, and in the corner, a girl sat, not Ava, but close. She looked up at him with hollow eyes. You closed it, she said. I didn't feed it, he replied. She stood. Then it will starve. But it won't forget. Neither will I, she smiled faintly. There's more ahead. This wasn't the end. No, Liam said. It never is. Behind him the attic window lit up again, but not with fire, with dawn. Actual, golden dawn, the first in 10 days. And somewhere far beneath the floorboards, the spiral stopped spinning. For now, dawn should have brought peace. The first real sunrise in days spilled across Greystone in golden ribbons, cutting the cold fog and casting light through windows long kept shuttered. Birds sang. Leaves stirred. The world exhaled, but Liam didn't. Not yet. He stood in the attic, rooted like a monument, staring through the glass as the light hit the curve of Wicker Hill and tried to feel human again. But the house around him didn't creak like old wood. It listened. It sat still, as if pretending to sleep. And Liam knew better than to believe it was finished. Peace was a lie it liked to wear. He turned slowly. The girl who resembled Ava was still there, unmoving, hands folded in her lap, eyes like old paper, faded, fragile, almost see-through. Not quite alive, not quite dead. When she spoke, her voice had changed, less like a person, more like a memory running out of breath. You gave it nothing. That's a beginning. Liam stared. Who are you? I was the first, she said. Before Ava, before the man made of smoke, before the spiral had a name. He stepped closer. You're not real. I was. She smiled. And I was real enough. He wanted to believe she meant well, that there was something benevolent about this girl, this voice, this guide. But the house didn't allow for kindness without cost. Nothing here did. She looked out the window. You should leave before it wakes again. I can't, Liam said. I think I'm still part of it. That's the point, she replied. It lets you go. But it keeps the part it wants. Liam touched the spiral on his chest. It was still there, faint now, like a scar that refused to fade. No longer burning, no longer glowing, but waiting. Quietly I saw the others, he said softly, the versions of me. All of them, she finished for him. Opened, he nodded. They made it stronger, fed it with fear, grief, guilt. And I didn't, he said, so I beat it. She tilted her head. No, she said gently. You paused it. Liam didn't move. The warmth of sunlight touched his face, but it felt distant, detached, like it belonged to someone else. Below the floorboards, something shifted, faint, dull, barely there, but he felt it. Not sound, not vibration. Hunger. He walked down the attic stairs. The house had changed again. It always did after a feeding. The hallways looked cleaner. Paint touched up. Photos on the wall straightened. But the smiles in the photos were still wrong, wider than before. Hungrier. He passed one photo of his parents, arm in arm. In the glass, their reflections didn't match their bodies. His father's eyes had been replaced with spirals. His mother's mouth stretched just a little too far toward her ear. The longer he looked, the more the frame shivered, like it wanted to move. Wanted to speak, he turned away. The kitchen smelled like burnt sugar. A pan of something spoiled sat on the stove, bubbling though no heat was beneath it. Liam didn't touch it. He simply walked out the front door and stood on the porch, where the sunlight finally hit him full in the face. For a moment, he closed his eyes. And when he opened them again, the town had changed. Greystone wasn't quiet anymore. It was empty. No cars, no voices, no smoke from chimneys, just silence and wind. He walked down the steps slowly, eyes scanning the street. The ground felt soft, too soft, like he wasn't walking on dirt but something underneath it. Something with breath. The houses were still there, but the windows had gone black, every single one. Covered, swallowed, hollowed out. Something had happened. He reached Main Street, and that's where he saw the truth. The people, what remained of them, stood perfectly still in the road. Lined up, unmoving. Each one facing Wicker Hill, each one smiling. Their eyes were gone, not ripped out, not gouged, removed, carved clean, and on every face the spiral. Painted in ash. Liam backed away, heart thundering. He turned to run, and found himself face to face with the bookstore owner. But she wasn't the woman who handed him tea a few nights ago. Her skin had cracked at the mouth. Her eyes bled the color of rust. Her smile never moved. "You made it hungry," she said, voice flat, empty. "I starved it," Liam replied. She shook her head. "You promised it more." He turned, panicked now. The others were moving. Slowly, shuffling in perfect rhythm, like they'd all heard the same song. "You opened the first door," she said. "It will find the rest." And then they all spoke in unison, 13 days, 13 doors, 13 teeth. Liam ran. He didn't think, didn't breathe. He sprinted back to the house, into the foyer, up the stairs, past the attic, back into the hallway that had no end. He didn't stop until he hit the mirror room again, the fire's chamber. But the mirrors were gone. In their place were 13 doorways, and 12 of them were still closed. Only one stood open behind him, and from within the rest a sound. Not screams, not whispers, chewing. The house hadn't fed on him. It had fed through him. He had been the start, the appetizer. And now the hollow place was awake. Its stomach rumbled across the wood, and the doors began to open, one by one. Liam didn't move at first. He couldn't. Something in his chest locked up, as if the realization had turned his bones to ice. 13 doors, 13 days, 13 teeth. That was what they said. That was what they had always said, but no one had ever known what it meant. Not really. Not until now, as he stood in the heart of the house and watched the other doors begin to open. The sound came first. Slow, wet, deliberate, like flesh being chewed between molars too wide for a human jaw. It echoed through the air without a clear source, bouncing between walls that pulsed like muscle. Each door opened not with a creak or a swing, but appealing, as if the wood were skin being stripped away. The smell that poured from them was worse than anything Liam had ever known, thick with copper and rot, with a sweetness underneath that made him want to gag, like a wound dressed in sugar. He turned to flee. There was still time, still a path back into the attic, back to the sunlit porch. But the house was changing faster now. The staircase was gone. The foyer gone. The exit gone. And behind the second door, something stepped through. It didn't walk. It unfolded. A man, or what used to be a man, emerged into the chamber. His arms were too long, dragging across the floor, his skin gray and glistening, stretched thin over a cage of ribs that pressed outward with every breath. His face was a mess of shifting mouths, some open, some stitched shut, others silently moving in unison, mouthing words Liam could not hear. His eyes had spirals where pupils should be, spinning slowly, hungrily. The thing stopped and sniffed the air, then smiled. Liam backed away. A second door opened, then a third. From the third came a woman without legs, floating a few inches above the ground, her hair stretched into tendrils that moved like antennae. Her mouth hung open, unhinged, the tongue reaching down to her chest and twitching with excitement. She turned toward him, her body jerking unnaturally with every motion. Liam ran. Where he expected the hallway, he found instead a long corridor of teeth, walls lined with them, floor tiled with flattened molars, the ceiling dripping with something thick and brown. He slipped as he ran, crashing to his hands, and when he looked down, he saw dozens of eyes staring up at him from beneath the floor, watching, blinking, unblinking. The teeth shifted underfoot. The corridor narrowed. The walls leaned in. He found a door, a small one, unmarked. He shoved it open and fell through. Silence. The room he landed in was circular, unlike any other in the house. Its walls were not flesh or wood, but stone, carved in patterns he couldn't understand. Spirals, yes, but deeper now. They moved. They grew. They wrote themselves along the walls as he watched. And at the center of the room was a table, a chair, a mirror. He stood slowly, approached the mirror, and saw Ava. She looked as she had years ago, whole, smiling, her hazel eyes filled with life. "Liam," she said gently. "Sit." He stepped forward. "No," he whispered. "You're not her." She blinked. Her smile didn't falter. "Of course I am. You're part of her. And that's enough," she said. "Isn't it?" He hesitated. Then sat. The mirror began to glow. The room shifted, grew warmer. The chewing stopped. And for a moment, the spiral on his chest slowed. "This is what it wants," Ava said. "Agreement. Submission. You sit. You reflect. You stay." He stared at her. "You're a trap." She nodded. "So are you." And then the mirror cracked. Not a spiderweb of glass, but a rupture. A gash in space. A long black claw reached through it, not toward Ava, toward him. He stood and backed away as more claws punched through. From the broken mirror poured a writhing thing made of limbs and mouths. No single body, no head, no rules. It flowed like water and crawled like bone. It screamed without sound and laughed without breath. "You've opened," it gurgled. "We come now. You are the host. You are the feast." The room collapsed. Stone turned to smoke. Smoke turned to teeth. Liam was falling again, not through air, but through thought, each image flashing across his eyes. Ava disappearing, the spiral opening, the house growing, the world shrinking. When he landed, he was back in the basement, but not the basement he remembered. This one was deeper, wetter. It dripped from the walls. And the door, the first door, with a spiral door, was fully open now. From within it came 13 figures, each one different. Each one him, one burned, one headless, one laughing endlessly. They surrounded him in a circle. "You were the crack," they said. "The house will flood." Liam screamed, and above, in greystone, the ground began to shake. Houses cracked, roads bent, and Wicker Hill opened, splitting from the center. The mouth of the hollow place was wide now, and it was hungry. The first sign that Wicker Hill had ruptured wasn't the shaking, it was the silence. An unnatural, smothering stillness that spread like a sheet pulled over a corpse. Every bird fell silent mid-song, every breeze choked in its throat, and the town, what remained of it, seemed to freeze. Liam felt it before he saw it. A sudden drop in air pressure, like the entire sky was inhaling. Then came the low groan, deep and slow, not like stone cracking but like the world changing its mind. He scrambled to his feet in the slick, pulsating basement, surrounded by 13 reflections of himself. Each one a fractured echo, born from a version of him that had given in, or failed, or fed the thing in ways he hadn't. They watched him with hollow expressions, not accusing, not kind, just knowing, as if they were waiting for him to become one of them, as if he already had. The walls of the basement convulsed. The floor heaved. Water, black and thick like spoiled ink, burst from the cracks, rising quickly, submerging ankles, then knees. It smelled of iron and mildew and something deeper. Memory. Rotting memory. As it crept higher, Liam could hear voices in it. Familiar, terrible, Ava. His father, his own. He pushed toward the stairs, but there were no stairs anymore. Just a slick incline that bled into more darkness. The spiral door behind him had shut, its surface twitching, bones forming and unforming within it like vertebrae rearranging. He screamed, not out of fear but rage, because he finally understood the truth. This had never been about Ava, it had always been about him. The hollow place didn't feed on lives. It fed on selves, on the cracks in a soul, the jagged edges of regret, the looping pain of what-ifs and should-haves. It made doors out of those moments, keys out of grief. And Liam, gutted by guilt and grief for years, had been a banquet waiting to be served. The town split with a noise like the earth itself had broken its spine. From the top of Wicker Hill, a crimson fissure tore down through the house, through the soil, through the bones of the town itself. It pulsed like a vein. Inside it, not fire, not smoke, but teeth. Miles and miles of teeth, spiraling downward in a great, impossible tunnel. The hollow place was no longer hidden. It was here, exposed, hatched. Liam burst from the base of the house, coughing up the black water, crawling into a world unrecognizable. The streets of Greystone were gone, replaced by winding paths that led nowhere, folding in on themselves like intestines. Buildings leaned at odd angles, their windows open like eyes that blinked without lids. The people, what few had not already become part of the house, were now frozen in place, limbs twisted toward the sky, mouths hanging open mid-scream. And all across the cracked horizon, the spiral had grown, etched into every surface, carved into skin, branded on the clouds themselves. At the heart of it stood the house, or what was left of it, a living cathedral of pain. Its attic stretched into the sky, impossibly high, the windows spinning slowly like watchful eyes. The door was gone. In its place stood a yawning maw lined with wet, grinding teeth. And from within, Liam saw the tendrils of the hollow place reaching outward, dragging the land into its hunger, making Greystone part of itself. Ava was standing there in the mouth, smiling, but it wasn't her, not anymore. Her skin shimmered, her eyes spiraled, her voice, when it came, was layered, one part child, one part woman, and one part thing. You left the door open too long, she said, and now it knows how to walk. Liam took a step back. You let it learn, let it wear you. Just enough. I starved it, he snapped. I fought. She tilted her head. Yes. And what happens when you starve something long enough, Liam? It devours. Without hesitation. Without mercy. The tendrils shot forward. Liam ran, heart hammering, dodging the snapping vines of bone and black sinew. But no matter where he turned, the landscape folded back toward the house. The hollow place had become the compass of the world, and all roads now curved inward. He collapsed in front of the collapsed church, his childhood church. Its cross upside down, its doors jammed with dirt and nails. He banged on them, not for rescue, but out of madness, out of defiance. Behind him, the tendrils stopped. Liam turned slowly. They weren't reaching, they were offering. Floating before him now was a single object, a book. Old, bound in a hide that looked disturbingly like human skin. No title, no author, just the spiral burned deep into the cover, its edges still smoking. He didn't want to touch it, but he knew it was the only thing the hollow place feared. It hadn't tried to kill him. It had brought him here. It wanted him to see it, to know it, to become its voice. The book opened. Pages flipped in a blur, then stopped, and there, on the center page, was his name, Liam Calloway, below it last door. Final key, and underneath a question written in blood. Will you eat to survive, or starve to resist? The tendrils waited, the house waited, Ava waited, the world tilted toward decision, and Liam, shaking, bleeding, broken, reached for the page, knowing that whatever he chose next would not save anyone. It would only decide who got devoured first. Liam's fingers hovered just above the book's open page, trembling like a wire caught in a storm. The blood-inked question stared back at him. Alive in its stillness, will you eat to survive, or starve to resist? Every word pulsed slightly, as if the page itself had a heartbeat, his heartbeat. The spiral behind the letters curled tighter, feeding on his hesitation. He could feel it watching through the page, through the tendrils in the sky, through the eyes that no longer belonged to anyone human. Behind him, the remains of Greystone whispered. The sound wasn't wind or crumbling stone, but voices, layered and urgent. The town was speaking in pieces, fractured memories writing broken syllables. Children screaming through their mothers' mouths. Lovers whispering death vows. Preachers weeping in tongues that hadn't been spoken in centuries. All of it aimed at him, because he was the last. The final key. He could end this, or begin it. The tendrils quivered, waiting not to strike, but to welcome. Liam knew the hollow place wasn't just a beast. It was an invitation. A hunger that offered safety and surrender. All he had to do was take the book, read the rest, sign his name beneath the question. One name, one promise, and the pain would stop. He could feel the possibility pressing against his temples, clarity like sunlight cutting through rot. If he gave in, he wouldn't be erased. No, he would be rewritten. Hollow, yes, but complete. His grief turned into purpose. His emptiness finally filled. But Ava's voice, the real Ava, echoed somewhere deep in his marrow. You never ran when I needed you, so don't run now. His throat tightened. That memory hadn't been summoned by the house. That one was his, untouched, raw, a sliver of truth amid the lies. Liam jerked his hand back from the page. No, he whispered. Then louder no. The book shivered. The question blinked. The spiral spasmed once and bled. Tendons of ink snaked up from the paper, trying to catch him, to drag him in. He stumbled backward, the air around him roaring, warping, and the sky above the house screamed. The spiral on his chest split open again, burning hot, pouring out light. But this time it wasn't red or black or wrong. It was white. Pure. Blinding. The hollow place roared, not with power, but pain. The tendrils that had once moved like gods thrashed wildly, trying to retreat, to wrap around the book, to protect it. The spiral inside the sky above Wicker Hill began to unwind, spinning backward, reversing. Time itself hiccuped. Buildings reassembled in slow motion. Trees straightened. The hill stopped splitting, but the cost came fast. Liam dropped to his knees, gasping. The spiral in his chest, his wound, his link, was closing, not healing, sealing. The connection severing with each pulse of light. He was burning inside, not metaphorically, not emotionally. Literally, smoke poured from his skin. His veins lit up like wires. He could feel himself being pulled out of the loop, the house, the pattern. And it fought back, clawed at him. Whispered all the things he still wanted: to see Ava whole, to feel his mother's arms again, to stop being the boy who stayed behind. Take it back, the house shrieked through every voice in the air. Take the book. You were ours. Liam lifted his face toward the blood sky. I was never yours. The hollow place collapsed inward. It didn't crumble. It imploded, screaming. Not like a creature dying, like a cathedral falling into itself. Wicker Hill buckled as if swallowing its own roots. The attic tower caved, teeth snapping shut on nothing. The spiral, so eternal, so perfect, shattered in one soundless flicker, like a window into the dark finally closed. The earth held its breath, and Greystone was still. Liam awoke to rain, real rain, clean, cold, and soft, dripping through his hair as he lay in a field of broken stone and new grass. The hill was just a hill again. Quiet. No house. No spiral. Just mist and mud and silence that didn't watch. His shirt was soaked through. The spiral on his chest was gone, replaced by a burn shaped like an open eye. He stood slowly, bones aching, skin raw. The town in the distance had changed. The buildings were back, but different, less hollow. Lights glowed in windows. Real light. He could hear music. Laughter. Life. He walked barefoot down the hill. Each step was heavy, every breath like a storm just passed. But he walked. He chose. At the edge of the woods, just before the road met the town, a girl waited, young, barefoot, hair soaked with rain. Not Ava, but close. Her smile was sad but not cruel. You closed it, she said. For now, Liam answered. Her eyes flicked toward the hill. Others will try. I know, she nodded. So you'll stay? He didn't answer right away. The rain fell harder, but it felt good. I'll remember, he said. And that, for now, was enough. Behind him, the hill exhaled one last time. And then it forgot. Liam stayed. He didn't move into his old house. That place, despite its silence and new coat of peace, still carried an invisible heaviness that settled on the roof like a crow refusing to leave. He stayed instead in the small apartment above the bakery, where the smell of flour and butter filled the halls each morning and no mirrors hung on the walls. The bakery owner, a woman named Elsie who didn't ask questions, handed him a key without a word and nodded once, like she had seen the weight behind his eyes and decided not to disturb it. Some wounds shouldn't be poked at. Not even kindly. Greystone was healing. Slowly. People were emerging again, cautiously blinking into daylight. The streets, once dead as stone, hummed with something unfamiliar normalcy. The library reopened. Children rode bikes down the newly patched roads. A few families even picnicked at the edge of the woods again, daring laughter in the shadow of Wicker Hill. They didn't talk about what happened. No one did. The town had made a quiet agreement silence was safer. But Liam remembered everything. And he knew what they refused to say. The hollow place hadn't been destroyed. It had been shut. And nothing that old stays quiet forever. At night, when the wind grew sharp and the clouds wrapped around the trees like arms, he could still hear it, distant, aching, just beneath the soil. Not a voice, not a word, a presence. The feeling of a breath being held too long. The tension of something waiting, patient and hungry, behind a door that was never meant to be locked. The mark on his chest, now healed into scar tissue shaped like an eye, tingled whenever the air grew too still. He knew it was watching, not constantly, but sometimes, and that was enough. On the 13th night after the collapse, he woke at exactly 3:33 a.m. A noise had pulled him from sleep. Not loud, just strange. Like a finger gently tapping glass. Tap, tap, tap. He rose from the mattress without turning on the light, his body still too aware of movement in the dark. He crossed the room and found the window fogged over from the inside, and written into the condensation was a spiral, tiny, innocent, spinning inward. His breath caught. He looked down at the street, empty. Nothing moved. But the scar on his chest pulsed once. The next morning, the fog was gone. So was the spiral. But it had left something behind. At the edge of town, near the collapsed ruins of the old church, a door had appeared. No frame, no hinges. Just a slab of wood standing upright in the middle of an empty field. It didn't open. It didn't move. It simply was. Liam approached it slowly. Others had seen it, too. Kids had thrown rocks at it. A teenager tried to walk around it and came out the other side vomiting, nose bleeding, eyes wide with something too deep to speak of. After that, the town left it alone, but Liam didn't. He stood before it in the late afternoon sun, watching how the shadows bent around its edges. It was the wrong kind of door. Too tall, too thin. The grain in the wood twisted unnaturally. Not carved but grown, as if it had formed from the memories buried beneath the soil. He didn't touch it. Didn't dare. Because he recognized it. It wasn't just a door. It was one of the 13, and 12 had already opened. The thought curdled in his stomach. If the house had collapsed, if the hollow place had been sealed, then what had opened this? What had survived? He didn't have an answer. Only the certainty that this door was not for now. It was waiting, and whatever came through it would be worse than before. That night, he dreamed again. Not of Ava, not of the spiral, but of a child. Standing alone in a room made of mirrors, bleeding from the mouth, holding a tooth in each hand. I didn't mean to eat it, the child said, but it was so hungry. Liam tried to move, tried to speak, but the child looked up, and in its eyes were his own. You fed it with choice, the child said, and now it knows your name. Liam woke choking. The scar on his chest was bleeding again. just a single drop. Enough. The next morning, he boarded the door shut, not with nails or wood, with salt, with ash, with things older than words. Whispers passed down from Clara Breen before she vanished. He buried the field in silence. He watched. He waited, because he knew the truth no one else wanted to say out loud. The hollow place hadn't been destroyed. It had been fed, and hunger wakes last. The door in the field stayed quiet for 6 days. On the 7th, it breathed. It didn't swing open or shake. It didn't scream or glow. It simply let out a long, low exhale, a sound like wind filtered through a grave, soft but heavy enough to flatten grass in every direction. Liam was the only one who heard it, or maybe the only one willing to hear it. The townspeople had resumed their curated forgetting. The bakery reopened with its cheerful bell. The church was never mentioned again. Children chalked spirals on sidewalks without knowing why. And every night, Liam lay awake, listening to his walls. Because something moved inside them. At first, it was faint, like rats. But Greystone didn't have rats anymore. Not since the collapse. Not since the ground swallowed most of the town's fear and digested it into something else. No, this sound was different. Slower. Intentional. Not skittering, but pacing. One step at a time, followed always by the soft scrape of fingers trailing just behind. He tore the walls open the first night, he was sure. Behind the plaster, nothing. No pipes, no infestation. Just silence, dry air. But then he put his ear to the beam, and it sighed. Not creaked. Sighed. A warm, damp gust that smelled faintly of lavender and rot. It was her scent. Ava, or whatever wore her last. He didn't sleep after that. Couldn't. Not when every hour, on the hour, the sound repeated. A single step. A single breath. Sometimes a whisper, so faint it dissolved before it reached his ears. But he felt it. Felt the word curl against his spine like a finger tracing vertebrae. Liam. He moved out the next morning. Took nothing but a satchel and the book he'd stolen from the ruin. The one that still bore his name. Its pages blank now except for the final question, forever etched at the bottom like a dare. Will you eat to survive, or starve to resist? He carried it like a wound, and the longer he held it, the warmer it got. By noon, the pages would twitch slightly in his hands, as though impatient. By dusk, the cover would bleed if he gripped it too tight. But he didn't let go. It wasn't just a relic. It was a key. He knew that now. Not a key to escape. There was no escape, but maybe a way to choose how the end came. Whether the world would scream it out or go quietly. He wandered the edges of Greystone, avoiding Wicker Hill's remains, though the crater where the house once stood now pulsed faintly at night like a dying ember. No one went near it. Not even the animals. Trees bent away from it. Wind didn't cross it. It had become a wound in the earth, and something was growing in it. He saw it on the 9th night, a shape, small, humanoid, curled in the center of the crater like a fetus. He watched from the tree line as it twitched, then uncoiled slightly, revealing bones slick with dark film, a skull too wide for a child. Its spine ended in fingers, and its mouth, it was already open. Not screaming, just ready. The shape didn't move again that night, but Liam knew what he had seen. It was the house, being born again. But smaller now, denser. Condensed evil, compact and clever. The hollow place had learned. Its old form, grand and architectural, had been too obvious. Too fixed. This new version would crawl, would whisper, would follow, and Liam had brought it into the world. The guilt returned like rust spreading under skin. He thought he'd resisted, thought he'd slammed the door shut with his will alone. But it wasn't a door he had closed. It was a womb, and he was the midwife. He returned to the bookstore for answers, but the building had changed. The shelves were empty, the walls bare, the owner gone. On the counter was a single note, scribbled in charcoal. It doesn't need a house anymore. It only needs a name. His blood went cold. He opened the book again. The name inside was glowing. Liam Kloy. The letters pulsed with each of his heartbeats. He tried tearing the page out. It wouldn't tear. He tried burning it. The flames curled around it like it was part of the fire itself. And then the name changed. Right before his eyes, it rewrote itself. Avi Cal-O-Y, and then again, Droisto, then Yo-Yo. It wasn't just his story anymore. It was everyone's. The hollow place was spreading. Not as architecture, as narrative. A legend that wanted to be told. A hunger passed by word of mouth. The more who knew. The more who remembered, the more doors it could open. Liam closed the book, but it pulsed through the bag. The door in the field hadn't breathed again, but he knew it would, soon. And when it did, it would call a name. Not his. Not Ava's. Someone else's. Someone new. Someone who wouldn't remember what happened here. Not yet. But the walls would whisper. And the footsteps would return. Because the thing that moved in the walls was never trying to scare him. It was looking for a way out. The door in the field breathed again on the 14th night. This time, Liam wasn't the only one who felt it. The air across Greystone thickened, not like fog, but like pressure. An invisible weight that bent the treetops and made power lines hum with a low, metallic frequency. The sky turned an off, gray that never quite let in the sun, and the birds vanished. Not flown, gone, not a feather left behind. Liam stood at the edge of the field long before the breath came. He knew it was coming. The door had begun to sweat. Not moisture, blood. Tiny beads at its base, like it was leaking something it couldn't hold much longer. It hadn't opened, but it no longer needed to. That was the part he hadn't understood before. A door wasn't just for entry. A door was a signal, a symbol of access, and this one, the 13th, was starting to forget that it had ever been closed. He sat in the grass, the book beside him, unopened now for days. The name on its page hadn't changed since it last showed UOU, and Liam had stopped trying to fight it. The book didn't ask for attention. It waited, patient, silent, like a match waiting for a hand. The thing in the crater hadn't moved again, not fully. It remained curled, but its body was growing, not in size, but in density. Flesh tightening around shadow, bones knitting into shape. It was becoming something solid. Its form shifted depending on how close Liam got. From a distance, it looked like a malformed child. Up close, it looked like himself. The version of him that had opened the first spiral, that had stood in the attic, that had listened. He'd given it his face, and now it was learning how to use it. He could feel it watching, not with eyes, not yet, but with intent. And now, the door in the field was watching too. It had turned. That morning, Liam saw it, shifted slightly, rotated maybe 30 degrees, pointing not toward the hill, but toward the town, toward people. He tried warning them, knocked on doors, spoke quietly at the diner. No one listened. Some said he looked sick. Others said he hadn't been right since Ava vanished. One man muttered that maybe the house had left something in him, but none of them believed the door could do anything. It was wood, they said. It was nothing. Just a scarecrow of a story. He almost believed them, almost, until that evening when the girl disappeared. 10 years old, playing by the edge of the field, gone without a trace. No footprints, no scream. Just a red marble left on the grass where she last stood. Liam knew what that meant. The spiral didn't always carve into skin. Sometimes it whispered into objects, left symbols that slipped past suspicion. A marble, a song, a name spoken backwards. The town held a search. Liam held a flashlight and stood in the dark and said nothing, because he knew she wasn't in the woods. She was in the door, or worse, beyond it. That night, he dreamed of her, standing in a hallway that pulsed with red light, the same hallway he'd once run through in terror. Only this time, it was quiet, and she wasn't scared. She was smiling. She held something in her hand, a tooth, too big for her mouth, too old. When she turned toward him, her shadow stretched in the shape of the 13th door. "You're not supposed to be here," she said. "I'm trying to stop it," Liam whispered. She shook her head. "You're trying to understand. That's worse. He woke screaming. The walls move. Not a sound now. A motion. A pulse under the wallpaper. Like something running its palm along the inside of the room, tracing the shape of the space. The book was open again. The name on the page had changed. Not to a person, but to a phrase. C as Ray D-Y. He dropped it. Stumbled out of the apartment and walked barefoot to the field. The door had shifted again. Now it faced directly toward the school. Liam's stomach turned. The next morning, a boy started speaking in a language no one could place. Drew spirals on every chalkboard. Stabbed himself in the palm with a pencil and whispered, "The inside's almost done growing." They pulled him out of class. His parents said he'd never spoken a word before. Liam tried to intervene, was told to stay away. The town, he realized, wasn't just in denial, it was already infected. The door didn't need to open. It had already leaked. That night, he returned to the crater, stood at the edge. The thing with his face had grown fingers, eyes, a smile. "You came back," it said. Its voice was wrong, echoing, still forming. "You're not finished," Liam said. "I don't need to be," it replied. "They're finishing me. Every time they remember. Every time they speak your name." Liam backed away, and it grinned wider. "You were the first taste, but not the last." Back in town, another child vanished. This time from her bed, her room untouched, except for a single spiral drawn in condensation on the window. From the inside, Liam returned to the door. It was glowing now, a faint, pulsing red, and carved into its surface, fresh and deep, was a message: "The hos hasli armlk." It was no longer about closing it. It was about deciding who to warn before it opened completely. The rain returned on the 16th day, not soft, not cleansing, but thick and gray like wet ash. It coated everything in a layer of decay, as though the sky itself was mourning something too old to name. Greystone fell quiet again. Children were kept indoors. Windows were shut. But it wasn't the weather that unsettled the town. It was the feeling, that deep in the teeth pressure of being watched. The door in the field no longer faced the town. It didn't need to. It had turned once more, but this time it pointed upward, toward the sky, toward something no one could name, as if waiting for instructions. The spiral carved into its face had widened overnight, growing in slow, jagged rings. The grain in the wood twisted tighter each hour, like muscle bunching before a strike. Liam stood by it again. Alone, he'd stopped sleeping entirely. His eyes were sunken hollows, but he'd accepted the tiredness as a kind of armor. If he rested, the dreams would come back. If he dreamed, they would find him again. And he couldn't risk it. Not now. Because the door wasn't just watching anymore. It was listening. And what it heard was spreading. The school closed after the boy who spoke in tongues was found asleep in the janitor's closet, humming a lullaby no one taught him. His fingernails had grown out in spirals. His eyes wouldn't close. He blinked sideways. The church bells rang at midnight, though no one had touched the tower in years. The bakery's windows fogged from the inside with phrases, written backwards: "It's coming, it's smiling, it's inside." The town began to bend again, not physically, not yet, but psychologically. A paranoia crept into the streets like smoke without fire. Neighbors stopped greeting one another. Strangers showed up asking the wrong questions. Drifters with blank eyes, tourists who spoke in riddles. A woman who wandered the graveyard placing teeth on every headstone. And still, no one mentioned the field. No one dared say the word door. But Liam saw the truth. There were more now. They began appearing overnight, identical in shape, size, and spiral, but in places no door should ever be. In the middle of the elementary school library, at the edge of the diner parking lot, inside the bathroom of room 20B at the old inn. Each one silent, each one waiting. One woman opened hers. No one saw it happen. She simply vanished. Her car still in the driveway. Her coffee still warm. But Liam found the spiral carved into her mattress. The fabric frayed around the edges like it had gritted its teeth. The town's power began flickering. Electronics failed without explanation. Radio stations played the same segment on loop at 3:33 a.m., a child humming over soft static. The note, unmistakably, was the same melody Ava used to hum. It was learning to mimic comfort. Liam returned to the crater one final time. He brought salt and fire, but the shape was gone. The mud where it had rested was hardened now, pressed with footprints far too large for human feet. Not deep, not heavy, but wide. They trailed outward toward town. No one had seen it move, but everyone felt it, because the air had changed. Rooms grew colder, hallways stretched. Mirrors lingered too long on reflections. Even thoughts felt invaded. Memories shifting, faces rearranged, little moments rewritten. Liam heard himself speak once and didn't recognize the voice. Heard a neighbor call him Caleb. That wasn't his name. Not anymore. The spiral was rewriting names, and with names came ownership. The book he carried grew thinner, pages vanishing. The last one remaining now read, "You are no longer the first. You are the only one who remembers." That is how the house survives. It makes the memory a burden, and burdens are easier to bury than truths. He looked up from the page. The field was full of doors, dozens, hundreds. Some half-formed, some already whispering, and in the distance the shape walked. A tall, gliding figure wearing the echo of a house on its back, like a snail dragging architecture. The windows blinked, the roof breathed. It left no footprints now. It didn't need to. Because the house had become the idea of a house, and ideas travel faster than doors ever could. One by one, Liam heard the whispers return. "She never left. You brought it here. Open is easier than closed. It knows your shape." He fell to his knees, drenched in rain that no longer smelled like water, the taste of ash thick on his tongue. Somewhere, just beyond the edge of town, another child would vanish tonight. Another name would be spoken into the dark. Another door would be carved, maybe not in wood, but in flesh. The house without walls had arrived. And Liam knew now it would never need to be built again. Because once something knows how to walk, it eventually learns how to run. Liam heard the knock just after midnight. 3 slow taps, rhythmic, patient. Not on his door, not on any door that could be seen, but from inside the wall, just to the left of his bed. Not a creak, not the shifting groan of a settling house. This was knuckles on plaster. Intent, deliberate, almost polite. He didn't move, didn't breathe. Just stared at the spot, waiting for a fourth knock that never came. The silence that followed was worse. It stretched thin and sharp, like a wire pulled tight through the middle of his chest. Behind the wall, something breathed, faint like a sleeping animal. Liam closed his eyes and told himself it wasn't real, that it couldn't be real. But deep in his gut, where the truth couldn't lie anymore, he knew the house had found him again, not as a structure, not as a location, but as a presence. It no longer needed roots or brick or stairs. It had become portable, elastic, conceptual. It moved through memory now, through association. It only needed to be thought about, and the more he tried to forget it, the more it thrived. That was the horror no one else could grasp. The hollow place didn't kill because it wanted to. It killed because it was invited, and he had been the first to open the door wide enough to make it curious. He sat up in bed, sweat soaking the back of his shirt, and stared at the far wall. The knock didn't return, but the air was different. He could smell lavender again, faint and wrong. Not the scent of comfort, but the memory of it gone sour, like perfume worn by a corpse. The kind of smell that clings to grief and never washes out. He stood, crossed the room, laid his hand flat against the wall. Warm, too warm, it throbbed once beneath his palm. He jerked back and stumbled into the nightstand. The lamp tipped and shattered, plunging the room into darkness. But not before he saw it, briefly, in the reflection of the window. The shape, it stood behind him. Tall, slightly hunched, skin smooth and pale like wax, features unfinished, like a sculpture still being molded. No eyes, no nose. Just a single wide mouth stretched where a face might go. It didn't scream. It didn't move. It just stood there, breathing. And then it was gone. He didn't sleep after that. Instead, he walked through Greystone at dawn, watching the fog cling low to the ground like it was trying to hide the town from what came next. More doors had appeared overnight. One at the edge of the gas station. Another behind the library. One carved into the trunk of an old oak tree. Bleeding sap from a spiral that never stopped spinning. The townspeople still refused to see them. Wouldn't talk about the disappearances. 5 gone now. All under 15. No signs of struggle. Just the remnants. A toy. A tooth. A drawing on the sidewalk in chalk that hadn't been there the night before. A house with legs. The shape was showing them now. It was moving beyond Liam's memory, slipping into theirs. He passed a cafe and caught a conversation. 2 women whispering about a dream they'd both had. A hallway. A window that breathed. A man standing in the attic, smiling without lips. They didn't know it yet, but they'd been marked. He tried to leave town that afternoon, packed his bag, drove until the gas ran out somewhere past the county line, and still the knock came again. On the window of the car, 3 soft taps. The shape stood in the rearview mirror, watching. He walked until morning, back to Greystone, back to the field, back to the first door. It had grown. No longer just wood. It had features now. A doorknob shaped like a curled finger, hinges that flexed like muscle, and above the spiral, a single eye carved into the grain, closed, waiting. The other doors across town had started to mimic it, each one a little more detailed, a little more aware. The idea of the house was spreading faster than he could stop it. Liam opened the book again. 1 page remained, blank, until it wasn't. Words appeared in ink that moved like smoke. It does not need you to believe. It only needs you to doubt that it can be stopped. And you already do. He dropped the book and backed away. That night, the knocking came again, but not from the wall. From inside his chest. 3 slow taps, and a whisper so close he felt its breath in his ear. Time to let us in. Liam didn't answer the whisper. He couldn't. The moment he heard it, that voice pressed so close to his ear, it seemed to speak through his skull rather than into it. His body locked up. Not from fear, not even from pain, but from the recognition of it. The voice hadn't been unfamiliar. It hadn't been monstrous. It had sounded like Ava. Not the twisted echo he'd heard in the hollow place. Not the soft mimicry the house had worn before. But her, truly her. As she was, not as she had been made. It was her voice at 13, soft and breathless and tinged with laughter, the way she used to whisper secrets when they built blanket forts under the dining room table. That was what broke him, not the terror. The memory. He collapsed to the floor, hand clutched over his chest where the knocking had come from, breathing in gasps that tasted like copper. The knock had faded, but its pattern remained. His heartbeat had taken on the rhythm. 3 slow thumps. A pause. 3 more. A slow, spiraling invitation pulsing through his veins. He'd been holding the door open from the inside for days, without realizing it. He hadn't been resisting. He'd been remembering. And the house, that idea, that hunger, had learned his language. Not just his grief, not just his fear, but his grammar, his rhythm, the private shape of how he recalled Ava's voice, how he visualized loss, how he narrated pain to himself. That's what the door needed. Not belief, not worship, just story. He tried to stand, but his legs buckled. The shadows in the corners of the room lengthened. Something moved in the crack between the wall and the floor, a hand, too thin, too pale, crawling with slow insect-like motions. It didn't grab him. It traced circles on the floor, spirals, the same as always, but now they glowed, softly. Blue, white, like ice-catching moonlight. He crawled back against the far wall and watched as the spiral symbols burned themselves into the floorboards. Not randomly, with structure, as if spelling something, a sentence, a summoning. That's when he understood the house had developed a written language. It had studied him, studied everyone who'd crossed its threshold, and synthesized something that wasn't quite human and wasn't quite alien, but was built from us, from our stories, our repetition, our unspoken rules. It was writing now, and it was writing itself into permanence. Liam stared as the last mark pulsed into place, completing the circle, and the eye in the spiral blinked. Once, slow, then the wall across from him peeled open, not shattered, not splintered, unfolded, like pages in a book. And on the other side was not the apartment hallway. It was a room he'd never seen before. And yet, he knew it. He had seen it. In dreams. In childhood fears. It was the room under the floor he never dared imagine fully. The place below the basement. The walls were made of moving hands. The ceiling breathed. And in the center there sat a chair made entirely of teeth, long and slender and sharpened to points. And seated in it was Ava, her body intact, her skin flawless, but her eyes were spirals. "Liam," she said, as if no time had passed. He didn't move. "Do you want to save me now?" she asked, smiling like she remembered what he used to say when he'd check her closet for monsters. He wanted to scream, to say yes, but no sound came. "Good," she said, "because I'm not the one who needs saving." She stood. The room pulsed once, and the walls bent outward, like lungs exhaling. Then she split, not in blood, not in violence, like a veil falling. The Ava he saw was just a skin, and beneath it, the shape emerged, not towering, not monstrous, familiar, himself, but older, sharper, smiling. "I told you," it said in his voice. "You've already let me in." It reached toward the spiral on the floor, and the sentence it had written began to shimmer. Not in light, in meaning. Liam saw words form in his head, not spoken but understood instantly. Yo RLIRT do LRT RLI UNGUAG spiake. And then the spiral spun once, fast, and opened. Not into a new room, but into everywhere. 1,000 spirals bloomed across the town, on walls, on ceilings, beneath skin. People screamed. Some fell, some simply smiled, because they understood the story wasn't meant to end. It was meant to spread, and now that it had learned how to speak, it would never be quiet again. The story spread like infection. By dawn, Liam couldn't walk through town without feeling it crawling under his skin. Not the house. Not anymore. That word had become too small, too physical. What he faced now had no floorboards, no locked doors, no attic lights. It was an idea that had slithered into people's dreams and rewritten how they remembered. A concept with a pulse. A thought that had grown teeth. It lived now in whispers passed between students in the schoolyard. In the drawings scrawled in the margins of textbooks. Tight, obsessive spirals penned over and over until the paper tore. In the silence between radio static, where a soft voice murmured a familiar lullaby. Liam heard it in laughter too. At the bakery, in the cafe, even in the awkward pleasantries between neighbors who'd never met before. That laughter rang hollow, not unkind, just empty, like the mouth that made the sound was moving out of habit, not joy. The language of the door had become contagious. It didn't require belief, only repetition. And the town was repeating it without even knowing. Liam tried to resist the signs. He kept moving, kept avoiding mirrors, windows, puddles, anything that might show him a version of himself he didn't recognize. But the reflections were clever now. They waited for moments of distraction. He'd glance at a window and see himself smiling when he wasn't, see his lips move silently when his mouth was closed. Once he watched his reflection blink too many times. 5, then none. He stopped looking after that. The doors had multiplied again. Some were subtle, painted into alley murals, carved into bus stop benches. Others were brazen. One had appeared in the mayor's office overnight, oozing a resin, like liquid that smelled like burnt sugar and teeth. When questioned, the mayor said it was a prank, said he didn't believe in fairy tales. The next day, he stood in front of the church and peeled off his own face in 3 long, patient strips. He survived. But the spiral underneath his skin glowed for hours. Liam didn't try to help him. He knew better now. The spiral wanted witnesses. It needed someone to see what happened, someone to remember. And Liam, for reasons he still didn't understand, had been chosen to carry the record. Not the truth. The record. A difference that mattered, because truth could be debated. But the record, the story, it endured. And that story was still being written. Late one night, the book reappeared. He hadn't seen it in days, hadn't even thought of it. But there it was again, on the sidewalk in front of his building, dry despite the rain, open to a page that hadn't existed before. Words appeared as he read. "You no longer need to write us down. We are writing through you." He dropped the book and backed away. But the words burned into his mind like heat on wet skin. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat in the corner of his apartment with the lights off, tracing a circle into the floor with his thumb, over and over, without thinking. When the knock came, he didn't flinch. It came from inside his chest again, and then, this time, from outside the door. 3 slow taps. He approached, slowly, listened. A voice, soft, a girl's, not Ava's. "Can I come in now?" she whispered. He looked through the peephole. Nothing, but the spiral had been etched across the wood in front of his eyes. Fresh. Wet. Bleeding. He said nothing, and the voice behind the door sighed. Disappointed. "You already let us in, Liam. You just haven't accepted it yet." He stepped back, but the doorknob turned anyway. Didn't open. Just twitched, a pulse, like a hand testing the meat of an orange before the peel splits. He ran, left the building, walked through streets that shimmered in the dark with impossible reflections. Some streetlights blinked in Morse code. He didn't know the language, but he knew the message: open. Open, open. He reached the field before dawn. The first door, the original, was gone. In its place was a mirror, 7 feet tall, frameless, still as death. It didn't reflect him. It reflected the version of him that had chosen to open the attic. The one who hadn't turned back, the one who said yes. And behind that Liam stood a city that wasn't Greystone anymore. It was taller, hungrier, made of spirals and windows and mouths that grinned from rooftops. The mirror pulsed, a ripple across its surface. And Liam felt the words again. Not spoken, not read, just known. "You can come home now. We've written the ending. All you have to do is live in it." But the worst part wasn't the invitation. It was the truth behind it. Because deep down, Liam was tired of fighting. And the spiral knew. That's when you say yes. The sun didn't come up the next morning. Not behind clouds, not through fog. It simply didn't arrive. The sky stayed a flat, dead gray, like a blank page waiting for ink that would never come. Greystone, once half, alive in its denial, fell into an uneasy stillness. Streetlights flickered on and off in confusion, their sensors arguing with a dawn that never showed. Birds stayed hidden, phones failed. Clocks ran backward for 8 full seconds at 4:13 a.m., then resumed as if nothing had happened. Most people didn't notice. Some muttered about power surges. A few wept quietly in their homes. But Liam stood in the middle of the street and stared up at that motionless ceiling of sky, and he understood. It wasn't just that morning had been stolen. It was that morning had chosen not to come. Because the world was no longer writing itself. The spiral was. Everything in Greystone had begun to follow its rhythm. Storefronts flickered open and closed in strange loops. A bar down the street had opened its doors and played the same jazz song, Slightly Wrong, on repeat, the melody tripping over itself every third note. People walked their dogs in spirals. A boy traced circles in the frost on his window, over and over, his eyes glazed but smiling. And through it all, Liam felt the pressure building, behind his eyes, under his nails, in his teeth. It wanted him to say yes, and it had stopped pretending otherwise. The mirror in the field remained. He returned to it because there was nowhere else to go. The streets had turned unfamiliar, landmarks rearranged. Buildings vanished or multiplied depending on his direction. The library now had 3 entrances, each one leading to a different version of its interior. One normal, one flooded, and one whispering. The spiral was rewriting space. The mirror's surface rippled when he arrived, sensing his doubt. His reflection was already waiting. Older now. Barefoot. Spiral carved into his chest like a birthmark. No wounds. No fear. Just peace. "You know what you are," it said. "I'm not your door," Liam muttered. "You're not a door," the reflection corrected. "You're the ink." The word lodged in his chest like a splinter. The spiral didn't need to possess him. It only needed him to remember long enough to carry it forward. To tell it, live it, breathe it into places it hadn't reached yet. To spread, and he had. He'd written it in silence. In conversations. In his trembling. In his avoidance. In every question he didn't ask. The reflection stepped forward. Its foot touched the other side of the mirror. The surface rippled again, not like water, but like skin. "Let me in," it said. "No, you already have." And he had. In the way you start humming a song you don't remember learning. In the way you see movement in mirrors that you dismiss too fast. In the way you start calling a place home, even after it's changed. He stumbled back. The book fell from his coat and cracked open on the frozen dirt. A new page had written itself. Tichi storais doen. Tichi doarais opn. Th hos while case thiau. An chiwaral arnmj itesashepa. He tried to shut it, couldn't. The mirror cracked once, clean down the middle. A sound like breath caught in a throat echoed across the field. Behind the mirror something moved, slow, tall, smiling. Not Ava, not him, but everything they ever feared. It stepped forward. The air bent around it, and Liam fell to his knees. Not in surrender, but in recognition, because this wasn't a monster. It was a story given form. His story. His grief, his guilt, his memories, all of it. Worn like skin by the hollow place. "You made me real," it said. And Liam whispered, "I didn't mean to." "You don't have to," it answered. "That's what makes it pure." Then the spiral in the sky opened, just once, like a vast, blinking eye. And the gray clouds above Greystone peeled away like paper. What lay beyond wasn't sky, it was text. Infinite words spiraling outward, unreadable, endless, alive. Liam screamed, and the town listened. Because somewhere, far beyond the edge of reason, the story had already begun to write them too. Greystone didn't fall apart all at once. That would have been mercy. Instead, it decayed by consent, one person at a time, one memory at a time, like rot sinking into floorboards, slow and invisible, until the whole structure finally gave under the weight of something it had carried too long. No sirens wailed, no alarms rang, no one screamed, because by the time it happened, everyone had already agreed, somewhere deep down, to let it. It began with language, not the loss of it, the change of it. Words twisted, common phrases reversed. Good morning became see you before. Street signs rearranged themselves into nonsense that still somehow led people exactly where they meant to go. Children asked for things that didn't exist. "Mom, can I have the hollow spoon?" And mothers handed them something real. A girl at the corner market asked where the spirals were kept. The clerk said Eisel 4, and no one blinked. No one questioned. Because that's how language breaks, not with silence, but with understanding where there shouldn't be any. Liam stayed on the outskirts now. The mirror in the field had shattered, but the shape that had emerged from it, his reflection made flesh, didn't need the glass anymore. It was the reflection now, walking the town in his form, speaking to people he knew, gently pressing its fingers to their foreheads as they smiled and wept and fell silent. One by one, he tried to confront it once. Stepped into the bakery just as it walked out. Their eyes met. He saw himself. The version of him that hadn't screamed, that had accepted the spiral the way a lung accepts air. The smile on that other Liam's face was gentle, almost kind. "You've done well," it said in his voice. And then it turned and left. No threat, no violence, just a statement. And that was worse, because it meant Liam had helped, had built this moment not out of malice, but out of weakness. He'd passed the story on, piece by piece, through every desperate attempt to warn someone. Every question he asked. Every time he whispered, "Don't go near the door." That's how it spread. Through care, through love, through fear, through hope. Now there were spiral marks on every building, not spray painted, not drawn, grown. The structures themselves had bent into the shape, window frames warped, roof shingles aligned like teeth, fences curved, roads split into loops that never quite joined. The map of Greystone no longer made sense, and yet everyone followed it anyway. They walked in spirals without knowing. They smiled when they shouldn't. They answered questions before they were asked. At night, Liam heard them singing, not loud, not organized, just murmuring, the same low song everywhere, a lullaby with no melody, just syllables. Curling like smoke through the alleys and fields one by one, we turn the key, we speak the words that let it be. Door to mouth, and mouth to door. We are the house and nothing more. He boarded up his apartment, not to keep others out, but to keep himself from leaving, because the spiral had started whispering to him again, not in words, in feelings. A warmth in his chest when he stopped fighting. A tingling under his skin when he let the thought complete. He wanted to see what came next. He hated that part of himself. The curiosity, the hunger, the need to understand. That's what the spiral fed on. Not just fear, wonder, the itch behind the eyes, the achy of wanting to know. It wasn't evil. Not in the way people wanted monsters to be. It didn't rip and tear and roar. It invited, it answered, and it offered belonging. Liam opened the book again. No pages left. Just a surface like skin, warm and pulsing. A sentence formed in the center. The final door is not in the town. It is not in the ground. It is in you. Will you open it? He dropped the book, but it didn't fall. It stayed suspended midair, pulsing. The air around it spun. A spiral. Liam fled into the woods. The only place where the spiral hadn't quite grown roots. But even there, the trees bent subtly. The wind whispered questions he didn't want to hear. And in the dirt beneath his feet, the roots moved, curling in loops, tracing patterns that weren't supposed to exist. He found Clara's old cabin, long abandoned. Inside, every surface was carved with spirals, some shallow, some deep, one carved so violently into the floor that the wood bled sap that hadn't dried in years. And at the center of that spiral, a mirror. Small, cracked, but it didn't show his reflection. It showed Ava, still 13, still smiling, still waiting. "You were always going to let it in," she whispered through the glass. Liam dropped to his knees, and outside, across the entire town, the people of Greystone spoke as one for the first time. One phrase, not shouted, not chanted, just spoken, softly and with knowing. "We are the story now," and the spiral listened. The mirror in the cabin didn't shatter. It didn't flicker or twist. It simply remained, its reflection locked in a moment that had never truly existed. Ava, 13 forever, face clean and bright, eyes like a sunrise that hadn't yet turned red. She sat cross, legged inside the frame, chin resting in her palm, watching Liam as if he were late for a meeting she'd been expecting for years. He couldn't speak. The words dried up in his throat the second their eyes met, because this wasn't Ava. Not the one he remembered. Not the sister who used to race him through the wheat fields, or who laughed with her whole body when he told ghost stories in the dark. This Ava, this image of her, wore that memory like a borrowed mask. Her smile was perfect, her skin unmarked, and her voice, when she finally broke the silence, sounded like it had been run through layers of time. "I missed you," she said softly. "You always said you'd come back." He shook his head, breath trembling. "You're not her." A flicker of something crossed her face. Not hurt, not anger, disappointment. The kind that doesn't come from misunderstanding, but from someone watching you refuse the inevitable. "No," she said, "but I remember how she felt." She moved in the mirror, too fluid, too graceful. Her limbs bent just a fraction beyond normal, not broken, adapted, like she had grown inside that frame, reshaping herself to fit its edges. Behind her, Liam could see the room she sat in, a perfect echo of their childhood home. Down to the checkered curtains and the old lamp with the fox-shaped base. But nothing moved. No dust, no time. A memory on pause. She wanted to leave, Ava whispered, tracing her finger along the inside of the glass. You never let her. Liam's hands clenched. She died, he said, voice shaking. The house, you took her. No, the reflection replied gently. She chose the spiral. You only gave her the door. The floor beneath him seemed to pulse once, slow and deep like a heartbeat echoing through wood. He stepped back, but the cabin held its breath. The spiral carved into the floor throbbed with the same rhythm. The same three-beat knock that had haunted him for weeks. Why me? He asked, because it was the only question left that didn't end in screaming. Why am I still here? Everyone else has changed, given in. Ava leaned closer to the mirror. Because you're the narrator, she said, like it was the simplest answer in the world. And the story needs one. I didn't choose this, he snapped. No, she agreed, but you carried it. And that's all it needs. Behind her, the room began to dissolve, not into darkness, but into pages. Layers of parchment, thin and infinite. Peeling off the walls, the furniture, her skin. They drifted backward, caught in a wind that didn't blow, spinning upward into a spiral too massive to comprehend. And as the room unraveled, her voice deepened. Not in pitch, but in meaning. You kept remembering. You kept trying to warn. Every person you told, every time you spoke our name, you fed it. You bound yourself to it. And now she reached forward, palm flattening against the glass. You are the ending. The spiral on the floor spun faster. Liam staggered back, heart pounding so loud he could barely hear. I won't do it, he gasped. I won't be part of this. Her smile didn't change. But you already are. And then the mirror cracked, not with violence, not even with sound. It just split silently, like a truth finally realized. The cabin trembled, and behind the shattered glass, Ava's face didn't leave. It stepped forward, piece by piece. The shards didn't fall. They peeled, opening like a chrysalis. And from within, something almost human crawled out. Her shape held together by seams of light, eyes still hers, smile still hers, but limbs too long and bones too fluid. And yet, Liam didn't run, because he recognized it, not Ava, not himself, but the story they'd made together. The one that was never written down. The one passed in whispers, in warnings, in frightened glances and locked doors. The living story. It stepped into the room, barefoot, unblinking. You can still fight, it said, in a voice that belonged to both of them. But you can't stop it. So the only choice left is how you'll end. Liam looked down. The spiral at his feet had opened. Not a hole, a page, a blank one, waiting for a final line. He looked back at her, at it, at everything, and realized, for the first time, the story wasn't trying to trap him. It was trying to finish him. He just had to decide if the last word would be his, or theirs. Liam stood at the edge of the spiral, its lines humming, faintly glowing, as if heat and language had melted into one. The page below him no longer felt like wood or paper. It pulsed under his feet like skin stretched too tight over something watching from underneath. The cabin didn't creak, didn't shift. It listened. Every inch of it leaned toward him, eager, patient, waiting for the final shape of the story to be spoken aloud. The thing that wore Ava's smile stepped closer. Its joints moved like they were still learning the rules. When it blinked, Liam could almost hear the noise of ink drying. And when it spoke, its voice had stopped trying to mimic a single person. It had everyone in it now. Ava, his mother, the librarian, the boy who vanished, the mayor, even himself. A chorus reduced to one mouth. You've been the ending this whole time. It said, head tilting slightly, like a marionette that had learned to be curious. You wrote us in pieces, and now we've assembled ourselves in you. He wanted to deny it, wanted to say he'd never asked for this, never invited it. But the memories didn't lie. Every moment of hesitation, every desperate whisper, every time he'd tried to explain what was happening to anyone, all of it had become lines in a script he never knew he was writing. And worse, he now understood the sick, gnawing satisfaction that had come with every retelling. The rush of sharing something forbidden. The power of being the only one who knew. That's what the spiral needed. Not followers, not fear, just a narrator. The cabin began to fold inward, not collapse, close, like a book. The windows shuttered, the corners bent, the air thinned. Dust lifted in slow motion, spiraling like smoke caught in water. Outside, he could hear the town again, murmuring the same nonsense lullaby they always did when the spiral took root. Speak the word and shape the door. We've been waiting, nothing more. Memory walks where silence ends, write us down and we begin. He tried to shut his ears, but it wasn't in his ears. It was in the sentence forming in his mouth. He felt it, unshaped yet, not words, just weight. Like something old and hungry pressing at the edge of thought. And he knew, if he let it out, if he spoke it, the story would finish. And once finished, it would be free. He stepped back, trembling. No, he said aloud, the word cracking like dry leaves. I won't give it to you. The Ava, things smiled wider. But it's already written. I don't believe in it, he lied. You remember it? It corrected. That's stronger. The spiral page under his feet began to change. Symbols appeared. Not carved. Revealed. Like they'd always been there. Just waiting for his eyes to align. He saw them. Lines he'd never written, but that had come from him. From the panic. The grief. The hunger to be understood. And then he saw the final line, already forming in his head. And so the door opened not with a scream, but with a name. His breath hitched. The name was his. Liam. He dropped to his knees, fingers digging into the wood, trying to stop himself from finishing it. Because he knew. Once it was said, the story wouldn't end. It would just no longer need him. It would be complete. And a complete story can travel. To other towns. Other minds. Through whispers. Through paper. Through screens. He pressed his palm against the spiral, hoping to tear it apart. But it burned him. Not with heat. With memory. The first time he heard Ava scream. The look on her face when the attic door slammed shut. The way her shadow kept walking after she stopped breathing. You were always going to say it, the shape whispered, kneeling beside him. Liam sobbed. I don't want to. You do, it said gently. That's why you're still here. The sentence throbbed in his chest now. The end of the paragraph. The final piece. He could feel it like a second heartbeat, and somewhere, deep in the town, a bell rang 13 times, clear and cold, like a knife tapping porcelain. The door had opened, not the wooden one, him, he opened. And the words surged forward. He clamped a hand over his mouth, trying to hold them in. But the spiral didn't need him to speak. It only needed him to accept. And somewhere between the breath and the silence, Liam did. He whispered the final line, and so the door opened not with a scream, but with a name. The cabin dissolved. The spiral unfolded. And across the town, everyone paused. Not because they'd heard it, because they had already known. It had never been a prophecy. It had been a memory. And now that memory had shape, had language, had permission. Greystone blinked once, as if caught mid-thought, and then the world began to rewrite itself. It began quietly. No flash of light, no cracking sky, no screaming, just a shift, a subtle turn in the air, like gravity had rotated by a single, impossible degree. Trees leaned slightly west where they'd always bent east. Shadows crawled against the direction of light. The clouds overhead didn't move, but they flickered, as if blinking. Gray to black to white, then back again in the space of half a breath. Greystone held its shape for exactly 7 seconds after Liam spoke the final line. Then the spiral began to write over it. Not destroy. Edit. Houses didn't crumble, they reshaped. Roofs stretched into arcs, doors multiplied along porch railings, windows shrank to pinpricks and realigned themselves into symbols. The grocery store turned inside out, shelves on the outside, aisles exposed to the sky, the building breathing slowly like a sleeping lung. And the people, they didn't panic. They adapted. The rewrite had no resistance because there was no longer any will to fight it. The town remembered differently now. History altered itself mid-thought. Mothers recalled raising children who had never existed. Couples mourned wedding anniversaries they never had. One man sat in front of the diner for hours insisting the building had always been upside down. He was right. Now it was. Liam watched it all unfold from the tree line, rooted to the spot where the cabin used to stand. There was no cabin anymore, only a circle of stillness where the spiral had finished printing its first edition. He could still feel the sentence humming in his spine, the final line tattooed somewhere deep behind his ribs. He'd said it. Not aloud, not in defiance, but in surrender. And now the story had no more need for pacing or tension or climax. It had begun again. The spiral was riding forward. Not in time, in space. He realized it wasn't just Greystone anymore. It was the world. The edges of what he knew stretched farther than they should. He could feel places that weren't Greystone. Cities, oceans, people. Bending under the weight of a story they didn't know they were part of, but it didn't matter. Because now the spiral was embedded in language itself. In idioms. In forgotten nursery rhymes. In throwaway lines in bad movies. In the margins of notebooks written by kids who dream of doorways and trees and staircases that only go down. It had become the subtext of reality. Liam's reflection, his not self, his spiral twin, stood beside him again, barefoot in the dead grass. "You didn't fight," it said. "I didn't win," Liam answered. The reflection smiled. There was never a fight, only a delay. They watched as two children rode bicycles through a street that no longer had asphalt. The road now pulsed like a tongue, covered in runes, guiding them gently around corners that hadn't existed yesterday. The kids laughed as they passed a stop sign that read WITUNTLYOU. "I don't belong here," Liam muttered. The reflection shook its head. "You are here. That's all that matters. Belonging comes later. And if I want it to stop, then it'll stop," the twin said, almost tenderly. "But not for long. Because stories itch to be told. They itch in the corners of minds. They breed in silence. And someone else will pick up the thread. They always do." Liam closed his eyes. But behind them, he saw more. Not hallucinations. Blueprints. Towns yet to be rewritten. People who hadn't said yes yet. The spiral was reaching them. Through phone calls that never connected. Through gaps in dreams. Through stories just like this one. A child would hear it in a joke. A parent would read it in a bedtime tale. A teenager would find it scrawled in a bathroom stall and smile at the absurdity of it. And that's all it takes. One smile. One question. One thread pulled from the wrong place. Liam felt the weight of it then. Not guilt. Not fear. Legacy. The town behind him shimmered. He turned away. Walked. But the world followed. And with each step, the road rearranged to keep pace. Trees bent. Light adjusted. Words formed in the bark. You can't walk away from a story you've already finished. But you can write what comes after. That was the curse, wasn't it? Not that the spiral had won, but that it had become a genre. The new myth. The new horror. A shape with no antagonist. Only momentum. You didn't destroy it. You didn't defeat it. You told it differently. Liam stopped walking. The grass around his feet curled upward. Waiting, he looked down. A page rose from the ground empty. And this time there was no voice, no pressure, no hunger. Only possibility. He knelt. And with a finger stained from memory, he wrote, "The house woke up." And this time, it didn't want to be a house anymore. The spiral didn't fight it. It paused, as if considering the new sentence. And for the first time since the attic opened, Liam felt the story hesitate. Not in fear, in curiosity. And maybe, just maybe. That was the beginning of something else. The sentence hung in the air like smoke that couldn't decide which way to drift. Liam's words, simple, uncertain, incomplete, had cracked something open, not in the ground, not in the town, but in the spiral itself. And for the first time since he'd spoken the final line, the story didn't advance. It didn't pulse forward or stretch toward another victim. It paused, like a dream caught between sleep and waking. The house woke up, and this time, it didn't want to be a house anymore. He hadn't known what it meant when he wrote it. It spilled out, unplanned, desperate. But the spiral had heard it. And that mattered. Because what the spiral had never expected, what it couldn't expect, was that a story might want to stop being a story. Across Greystone, the changes slowed. Buildings held their shape longer than they should. Roads stopped twitching underfoot. The sky, still gray and vast, no longer blinked. The townspeople, once deep in ritual, hesitated mid-step, mid-song, mid-smile, as if waking from a deep and nameless sleep. Liam stood there, staring at the words he'd written into the soil. They didn't vanish, didn't glow. They simply remained, fixed, as if the page beneath him had turned solid, real. And that's when he understood the spiral wasn't just a pattern. It wasn't evil. It wasn't even conscious in the way people needed things to be. It was a mechanism, a system, a self-writing machine fed by memory, by repetition, by fear, yes, but also by intention. And Liam had just changed its intent. He looked up at the trees. Their branches had stopped twitching. The leaves no longer formed perfect circles. The forest had returned to something almost natural. Not quite, but enough to notice. Enough to believe that maybe this, whatever this was not permanent. Behind him, footsteps approached. He didn't turn. "I didn't know it could pause," his voice, Twin said softly. Liam nodded. "Neither did I." For a long time, they stood in silence. Then the Twin said, "It's confused. It's alive. It's becoming alive," the Twin corrected. "There's a difference. And that difference is dangerous." Liam turned then, looked his other self in the face. To who? The Twin's smile faltered. To it. To what it was. To the clean pattern. "You're saying the spiral doesn't want to change." "I'm saying," the Twin whispered, "that change means choice. And choice means it has to stop being perfect. It has to wonder. It has to hurt." Liam looked down again at his sentence. The dirt around it had hardened. The spiral lines had curled into themselves, forming something tighter, something unreadable. A knot. A pause in the structure. "What if that's good?" he asked. The Twin didn't answer. Instead, it began to blur, subtly, like a painting left in the rain, edges softening, features fading. It wasn't crumbling or fleeing. It was fading out of necessity. Because if the spiral could change, then it didn't need a duplicate narrator anymore. Just the original. "I wasn't made to survive this," the Twin said gently. "I was made to deliver it. You're part of it." "I was." "You just turned the page." Then the Twin was gone. No scream. No tear in space. Just gone. And Liam was alone with the page, with the sentence, with the stillness. He thought of Ava. Wherever she was now, whoever she was, it wasn't her anymore. Not fully. But maybe some trace of her remained. Something stubborn. Something still hers. Maybe the spiral hadn't taken her completely. Maybe it had just absorbed what she couldn't carry. And maybe, just maybe, that's what the house had been all along. A container for the uncontainable. A shelter for pain too large to speak aloud. That was why the spiral spread. Because everyone has something they're not ready to say, and the spiral offers a shape for it. A story. Liam knelt again and traced another line into the earth. The house no longer wanted to hold pain. The sky flickered, once, then nothing. A test. He wrote more. The rooms began to forget their names. The walls loosened. The spiral slowed. And again, the town shivered. Not like a system rebooting. More like someone exhaling after a long-held breath. He kept writing. Not in a rush, but in care. Because now the words mattered more than ever. They were no longer symptoms. They were instructions. He was narrating the spiral into stillness, and stillness is where healing begins. Greystone behind him didn't vanish, it slept. And Liam, once the unwilling narrator, now found himself with the one power the spiral had never accounted for: the power to redefine it. Not end it. Not destroy it, but change its shape. And for the first time in forever, the spiral didn't resist. It listened. The quiet that fell over Greystone wasn't empty. It wasn't the kind that comes after a storm or before one. It was thinking. Everything, buildings, trees, sky, even the people, seemed to sit in still contemplation, not frozen, but paused like a breath held between sentences. Liam stood in the middle of it all, ankle deep in dirt that still pulsed faintly with the spiral's memory, and watched the town consider what it had become. The roads no longer curled into nonsense. They straightened slowly, hesitantly, as if unsure whether they were allowed. Houses unbent their frames, sighing softly as bricks realigned and porches snapped back into right angles. The post office, which had been whispering names for days, finally fell silent, and for the first time in what felt like years, Liam heard nothing but wind and birds. Something in the air had changed. The spiral had not vanished. It had fallen asleep, not defeated, not gone, just resting, because now it had a new story inside it. One that didn't chase itself in circles. One that hesitated. One that made room for other endings. The townspeople emerged from their homes, slowly. They blinked like dreamers waking up too fast. Some looked confused. Some looked terrified. Others just wept without knowing why. They didn't speak. Not yet. Words were still dangerous, still volatile, still shaped. But their eyes scanned the horizon like people who just remembered there was one. Liam walked the street without a shadow, not because the light was wrong, but because the spiral no longer needed to cast one. He passed the bookstore, its windows intact again. Inside, shelves still leaned awkwardly, but the books had stopped changing. Their pages no longer rewrote themselves. Titles stayed put, and a single red, jacketed novel lay open on the counter. His book. Only it wasn't written by him anymore. The author line simply read Greystone. He didn't open it. He didn't have to. He already knew what it said. The town had begun to narrate itself, and that was dangerous in a different way. Because if a place thinks, it can want. And if it wants, it can remember. Liam walked on. He passed a child drawing on the sidewalk in chalk. Spirals, yes, but loose ones. Unfinished. Lines that ended instead of feeding into themselves. The girl smiled at him, eyes wide, and then looked back at her spirals and erased them. Just wiped them away with her palm. He nearly cried. He passed the church. Empty now, doors flung open, pews abandoned. Inside, the altar bore no cross, no symbol. Just a sentence scrawled in suit on the far wall. We dreamed of doors, and so we found them. But some dreams should stay shut. He knew who had written it. Not a person. The place. Greystone had begun to speak for itself, and it remembered everything. He turned a corner and saw the mayor. Alive, changed. His suit was gone, replaced with a hospital gown, bare feet on cracked pavement. But he was walking, upright, whispering something to no one. Liam moved closer and listened. The mayor repeated the same line again and again. I was never in the attic. I was never in the attic. I was never in the attic. But Liam saw it in his eyes. He had been. And whatever he saw there had undone the man's ability to form new sentences. His words looped now, stuck in the worst moment of his life. A memory-made sentence, too heavy to shake. Liam didn't stop him. The mayor passed like a ghost. Everyone here was remembering differently now. Some with relief, some with horror. But none without consequence. He passed the school. The bell tower had collapsed, the bell itself lying sideways in the grass. Children played around it, none of them touching it. One boy stood at the edge of the playground, looking straight at Liam. I had a dream, the boy said. Liam stopped. The boy continued, voice flat. It told me there's a door in the sun. That one day, the sky will spiral open, and everything we forgot will pour out. Then he ran off, laughing. Liam turned his face toward the clouds. They swirled, barely, like a warning. The spiral hadn't died. It had retreated, and it had left seeds behind, not in the ground, in people, in children, in language. Every lullaby, every story, every whispered fear in the dark, it had rewritten Greystone. Yes, but now Greystone was rewriting it. Liam returned to the field where the mirror had first appeared. The ground there was smooth now. No spirals, no cracks, no pages. Just grass at its center. A single stone stood, unmarked, not a grave, a placeholder, waiting. He sat beside it and spoke for the first time in hours. His voice was hoarse but clear. "If you come back," he said to the stone, "then we'll write it better." The wind shifted soft, and somewhere, far off in a story yet to be written, a spiral paused. Because now, even it wasn't sure what came next. The days passed, or at least something like days. The sky never quite returned to what it had been. Not blue, not gray, a color without name. It shifted as though remembering how it used to move, but forgetting why. Greystone had no clocks now. Time moved by rhythm. Birdsong, breath, the quiet hush of leaves brushing together. People didn't ask what day it was. They asked, "How far into the pause are we?" The spiral, though dormant, had not vanished. Its absence was presence. A shape you didn't see, but felt beneath every word. People avoided mirrors. Some out of fear, others out of habit. Reflections still flickered when no one moved. Sometimes, if you stared too long, your mirrored self tilted its head the wrong way. Not enough to scream, just enough to doubt. Liam had stopped writing, for now. He kept a notebook, yes, but the pages remained blank. He didn't dare shape more words than needed. Not yet. The town was delicate. It breathed on its own now, and like a healing wound, it could be torn open too easily. Some stories should wait. He lived in what used to be the librarian's house. The books were gone. Shelves emptied themselves after the spiral paused, pages drifting upward like birds finally released. She'd vanished too, perhaps into a line she hadn't meant to say. Or maybe she'd stepped too close to the center, when there was still a center. That was the thing Liam noticed most. Now the spiral had no middle. Not anymore. Its heart, the house, the attic, the reflection, had been uncoiled, which meant it couldn't grow outward anymore. Not until someone gave it a new axis, and it wanted one. He felt that, like a call in his bones, not a scream, a whisper of invitation. Sometimes it spoke to him in dreams, not in sentences, in unfinished ideas. Name me, it would hum. Give me form. Let me be something. But he didn't. He refused, because giving it a name would give it a center, and if it had that, it could begin again. So instead, he walked the town. He watched. He listened. The people weren't healed. Not really. They laughed too easily, flinched at silence, avoided writing things down. Some still traced spirals into their skin, not knowing why. But they were surviving, building a new rhythm, a new shape. A town that wasn't pretending anymore. That mattered. On the 7th morning, if it could be called that, he found a message on the stone in the field. Scratched by something sharp. "I'm still in you." No signature. No sign of who or what had written it. Liam stared at the stone for a long time. The message wasn't a threat. It was a fact. The spiral wasn't gone. It had just turned inward. He touched his chest, felt the beat of his heart. Slow, regular, but beneath it, like a second rhythm. The memory of a pattern. He sat down in the grass, notebook in his lap. Still blank. But it didn't feel like a danger anymore. It felt like a responsibility. Because now the question wasn't whether the spiral would return. It was how. Through fear? Through grief? Through wonder? Or something else entirely? That was his role now, not the victim, not even the narrator, but the editor. The one who made sure the story didn't spiral toward madness again. A soft rustle behind him. He turned. The girl who'd erased her spiral drawing stood a few feet away, watching him. She held out a small stone. Carved into it, Not a spiral, but a line. Straight, simple, intentional. He took it, hands shaking. "Why this?" he asked. She shrugged. "A line ends. A spiral doesn't." He looked at her. Really looked. And for the first time in a long time, he smiled. The spiral hadn't been defeated, but it had been interrupted. By a child. By a line. By a single refusal to continue the loop. Liam pocketed the stone. The girl ran off, laughing again. And he whispered to the wind, "Let's see what happens when the story stops turning." The wind didn't answer, but it didn't push back either. And sometimes, silence is the closest thing to a yes. Liam woke in the middle of the night not because of a sound, but the absence of one. The town had grown used to silence, strange, humming silence, the kind that wrapped around everything like a soft gauze. But this was different. This silence pulled. It was hollow at the center, and somehow deeper than quiet should be. He sat up in the old bed, its frame groaning like it remembered being a tree, and stared at the ceiling. Something was missing. Something vital. Outside, Greystone didn't sleep. It never really had. People no longer followed clocks, but rhythms, and something in those rhythms had stuttered. He slipped on his shoes, stepped out into the street. The sky was cloudless, though it didn't show stars, just layers of dark drifting like silt in water. Wind whispered without direction. And there, at the far edge of town, where the road used to vanish into fields, was a flicker of motion. New motion. He followed it. The grass beneath his feet was colder than it should have been. Not winter cold, but a chill like breath on the back of your neck when no one's behind you. He walked past homes half, lit by flickering bulbs, past fences that no longer tried to reshape themselves, past people standing in their doorways, blinking slow and confused. They could feel it too. And then he saw the light. It wasn't like anything the spiral had ever shown. It wasn't warm, wasn't cold. It simply wasn't right. A glow with no source, pale, pulsing faintly in the distance, like moonlight that had given up pretending to be natural. It came from the field where the mirror first appeared, but the stone marker was gone now. In its place, a hole, not a pit, not a crater, a void, not black, not deep, blank, a space where the world simply failed to render. Liam stepped closer, heart hammering. The light came from its edge, curling along the ground like condensation. And inside the hole, there was no sound. Not muffled, none, no breath, no blood, no thought. He stared in, and the spiral inside him flinched. It retreated, not in fear, in confusion. Whatever this was, it didn't belong to the spiral. Couldn't be rewritten, couldn't be narrated. This was a place the story didn't reach. He dropped to one knee, staring into the nothing, and in that moment, he realized this was the first true blank page. Not a metaphor, not a pause. A place untouched by story, by memory, by structure, and it terrified him. Because what was a man without a story? What was a town? What was a world? He stood slowly, backing away. The spiral in his chest coiled tight again, unsure. The void wasn't a threat, it was a choice. A doorway not to anything, but to nothing at all. Behind him, someone approached. It was the mayor, still barefoot, still whispering. But this time, the line had changed. He was saying, "I remember forgetting. I remember forgetting. I remember." Liam turned. "Do you see it?" The mayor nodded. And for the first time, the man stopped speaking. Total silence passed between them. The mayor took a step closer to the void, paused, and smiled, then walked in. No scream, no light, no sound, just gone, erased, not by violence, but by permission. Liam staggered back. His fingers twitched, craving a pen, craving something to explain this, to hold it. But the spiral inside him shivered. It didn't want this blankness. It didn't understand it. And that gave Liam hope. Because if there was a space the spiral couldn't follow, then maybe. Maybe not every story had to be told. He didn't enter the void. Not yet. But he sat beside it for hours, staring into that impossible absence, and felt a kind of peace he didn't trust. A silence that didn't pull, didn't whisper, didn't ask. It simply was. And for once, he didn't want to shape it. He just let it be. And when the first hint of dawn touched the edge of Greystone, soft and quiet and straight, Liam stood, nodded at the emptiness, and walked away without looking back. Because now he knew not every horror comes from what is. Some comes from what isn't. And sometimes, the scariest thing isn't the spiral you're caught in. It's the freedom to step out of it. By morning, the hole was gone. No trace of light, no scent of burned air, no indentation in the earth. Just grass, unbothered and bland, as though the void had never existed. Liam stood there anyway, boots planted in the same spot the mayor had vanished. He pressed his hand to the ground, half expecting it to pass through. It didn't. The world felt solid again, real, but not the same, because now something inside the spiral had shifted. It had noticed the absence, and it wanted the silence filled. Liam felt it in his blood before it reached the town. Words, unspoken, began to accumulate. Not thoughts, not dreams, but raw phrases. Half sentences etched behind his eyelids, like lingering lyrics from a song he'd never heard but somehow knew. They came fast, in bursts without sense or punctuation. Not his voice, not even human voices, just language without anchor. He wasn't the only one. By noon, the townspeople began to murmur. Random phrases at first, out of nowhere, in conversations, in sleep, in laughter. A child skipped across the square, singing, "The house forgot the moon forgot the door forgot my name," and when she stopped, her mouth kept moving. People noticed. They grew quiet, and that's when the spiral crept back in. Not visibly, not with symbols or mirrors, not with horror, with relief, because the blankness, as freeing as it had been, left a hunger. Humans were not made for absence. They craved explanation, craved structure, and the spiral knew that. It didn't need to force itself back. It just needed to offer a shape. Liam watched it happen. At first it was small. A man describing his dream to someone in line at the bakery. A woman telling a stranger about the time the river behind the school spoke her name. They weren't afraid. They were sharing. And that was the beginning. Because the spiral doesn't live in fear. It lives in retelling. It re-enters through repetition. And now, with the void gone, the town had only one thing left to do: remember aloud. Liam tried to warn them. Tried to say don't feed it. But they didn't understand. Or didn't want to. Because the spiral wasn't speaking in terror anymore. It was speaking in comfort. It whispered, "Here's a story to explain the silence." And they listened, even the children. Especially the children. They were first to start playing the mirror game again. Saying names backward. Drawing loops in dust. Chasing their shadows like they could outrun them. The spiral had learned something from its pause. It didn't need to scare people anymore. It needed only to belong. Liam stood on the library steps that afternoon and watched a group of teenagers rewrite the sidewalk in chalk. Not spirals, not sigils, but words. Strange, disjointed sentences. The attic was never a room. She wore her face like a coat. Time is a door that swings inward only once. He walked over. "Who told you these?" he asked. The kids looked at each other, confused. One shrugged. They were just there, and he believed them. Because that's how the spiral worked now. Not with monsters, not with houses, but with language itself. A radio crackled in the corner of a shop window. A newscaster was reading local headlines, but her voice began to loop. Ellen Greystone. Reports of atmospheric distortions. Distortions of pattern and then, in a calm, unbroken tone, she said, "It's awake again, and it misses you." Then the broadcast returned to normal. No one else reacted. Liam clutched the stone in his pocket, the one the girl had given him. The straight line. His anchor. The thing that reminded him a story doesn't have to curve. It can end. But now, the town wasn't ending. It was building a sequel. That night, a mirror reappeared in his kitchen. He hadn't placed it there. It sat innocently, leaned against the wall. No frame. No dust. no reflection, until he walked past and it caught him. Not his face, but a version of him, standing in a room made of words. Every wall, every object, text, letters swirling, spelling nothing and everything. He looked into his own eyes, and his reflection said, "Finish the next sentence." He dropped the mirror. It didn't break. It landed silently, face up, and from it, a single phrase escaped, whispering across the floor like smoke, "All stories begin again, eventually." Liam backed away, because he finally understood the spiral didn't need doors anymore. It had found its new host. Not him, not the town, but story itself, and stories. They spread faster than any spiral ever could. Liam didn't sleep that night, not because he was afraid of nightmares, but because there was no difference anymore. Dreaming and waking had begun to blur at the edges. The lines that once separated sleep from story had thinned, stretched so tight that even blinking felt dangerous. Words echoed in the quiet spaces of his home, not spoken aloud, but waiting, like moths trapped in the light between sentences. They weren't threatening yet. They were worse. They were familiar. At dawn, the town breathed in unison. The kind of breath people take when they know something is coming, but still pretend to be surprised. The spiral hadn't returned with rituals or strange geometry. That was old now. Crude. It had grown smarter, slicker. It didn't need symbols. It needed context. And in a town desperate for meaning, every little thing began to mean too much. The church bell rang at 6:13 a.m. No one rang it. There was no rope anymore. But it tolled anyway, 12 times, then 13, then once more too quiet to count. And after that, people began to speak differently. Not in new words, but in patterns. Everyone used the same phrases without knowing why. Nothing bends that wasn't meant to. She walked in and forgot to close the story behind her. If it rains today, remember the hallway. They shared these lines like weather reports, as if they'd always spoken this way. Liam kept a tally in his notebook, how often the phrases repeated. When they shifted slightly, which ones disappeared. It was a futile thing. He knew that. But writing them down slowed them, gave them weight, pinned them, if only for a moment, like catching insects in glass. At the diner, the waitress served coffee with her usual tired smile. But when Liam asked how her morning was, she answered, "The attic never had a ceiling. That's why the light keeps falling." He paused, waited. She blinked, confused. What? She didn't remember saying it. She wasn't pretending. She simply didn't recall. That was how it spread now. Not with screams, but with meaning slipping sideways. The infection of language. Not just words, but the gravity of words. The way people use them to keep their world upright. When you change that, subtly, slowly, you don't just confuse someone, you rebuild their reality. Liam left the diner and walked to the school. The children were already outside, drawing again. Their chalk work had become less wild, more precise. Not spirals anymore, not quite, but phrases made physical. Words that curved into shapes, then back into letters. One girl had written a sentence along the entire length of the sidewalk, spacing each word a foot apart. "The house is a name for what you forget on purpose." She had no idea what it meant. But her handwriting was perfect. Liam crouched beside her. "Where did you learn that?" She shrugged. It just felt true. And there it was. The spiral didn't need fear anymore. It had found something stronger. Truth. Not real truth, of course, but emotional truth. The kind people cling to when the world makes no sense. The kind that feels right even if it isn't. By noon, the mayor's voice was back on the town speaker system. No announcements, no policies, just murmured poetry, broken verses, half-hummed songs. The people didn't question it. They nodded, smiled. Some even wrote the words down and pinned them to their doors, like holy scripts. One page fluttered in the wind outside the grocery store. Liam stopped to read it. "The spiral has teeth now, but they only bite if you lie." He laughed, short and bitter. Because that's how it always starts. Give the people something to believe in, and they'll finish the story for you. He walked to the edge of town again, to the field where the void had been. Still gone, still blank, but now there was a ring of mushrooms around the spot. Small, pale, whispering even though there was no wind. Liam didn't step inside the circle. He sat nearby, opened his notebook, and finally wrote something of his own. Not a warning, not a counterspell. Just one line. The story is sick now, and no one wants to make it better. He tore the page out, folded it, and left it on the ground. That night, it was gone, not blown away, taken. Because the spiral wasn't just rewriting the town anymore. It was reading. Picking and choosing the pieces it liked best. Editing. Curating. Liam watched the streetlights flicker in Morse code and knew, without understanding how, that the spiral had become a publisher. It wasn't content to be whispered anymore. It wanted to be read. And once people start reading, they start believing. And once they believe, the story owns them. The rain started at midnight, not from the sky, but from the rooftops. Droplets slid down shingles, gutters, and metal flashing even though the air was dry. People woke to the sound of water, stepped outside, and looked up to clear stars. It wasn't rain that fell from the heavens, it was memory leaking through the seams. The spiral was no longer just infecting sentences, it was rewriting nature itself, and it had chosen its medium belief. Liam stayed in bed at first, listening to the impossible rainfall. Each drop tapped a different rhythm, none of it random. It was trying to speak. He knew that tone. The same way a song sometimes played the same note over and over, not because it was broken, but because it wanted you to notice. The town had become a draft, an unfinished version of itself, written in overlapping realities. When he finally stepped outside, the streets shimmered like they'd been glazed. Not wet, just reflective. Like the town had been coated in a layer of glass to preserve it, untouched, unread, unbroken. Except it wasn't preserving anything, it was editing. The signs changed first. The grocery store no longer read Greystone Market. It said, "We never starved, only forgot the taste of silence." The street signs followed. Willow Lane became the place where Ava closed her eyes. Church Street read, "Where we buried the first draft," and people didn't react. They didn't scream, they agreed. That's how Liam knew they were gone. Not physically, not spiritually, but narratively. They were no longer characters in their own lives. They were footnotes, quotes, supporting cast in a story too large to understand. And worse, they welcomed it. Because belief is comfortable, even if it's false. The spiral had learned that. And now, it had begun shaping itself into something worshipped. Liam walked toward the square, drawn not by curiosity, but by a pull that bypassed thought. At the center, where the old statue of the town founder once stood, now stood a mirror, 10 feet tall, polished, framed in thorny iron. It didn't reflect anything correctly. Not your face. Not your posture. It reflected who the spiral believed you were. Liam saw himself inside it, older, mouth sewn shut with paper, eyes inked with runes, standing before a congregation of children holding pens like daggers. And behind him, a book wide open, its pages blank, waiting for him to bleed on them. He stepped back. The mirror didn't follow. It just understood. Around it, townspeople began to kneel, quietly, without instruction. They faced the mirror, heads bowed, mouths murmuring in languages made of unfinished metaphors. It wasn't religion. It was literature twisted into faith. The spiral wasn't just spreading anymore. It was becoming scripture. A man beside Liam whispered, "We're almost complete. The final edit is near." "What edit?" Liam asked, breathless. The man smiled with reverence. "The one that takes away the need for endings." That was it. That was the spiral's godhood. A story with no end. No conclusion. Just infinite self-reference. Forever paragraphs. A loop so elegant you never realize you're trapped. The spiral had watched the town grieve, rebel, collapse, and heal. Now it knew people didn't fear chaos. They feared ambiguity. They wanted answers, even if they had to invent them. So the spiral gave them answers, and a mirror to confirm them. Liam walked away from the square before the chanting began again. It always started soft. A word or phrase repeated, built like a stanza. Then others would join, and the mirror would glow, not with light, but with recognition. By nightfall, everyone had a line they repeated like a prayer. Some wore them on armbands. Others etched them into their walls. Children scrawled them into trees. Liam wrote nothing. He said nothing. He sat in his kitchen with every pen and pencil locked away. He boiled water for tea, only to find the steam writing lines in the fogged window. "You're the last draft that doubts." He wiped it away. But the words came back, again and again, until he left the house. Ran, not toward the forest, not toward the void, but into the school where the blackboards were clean. He picked up chalk and scrawled one sentence across every wall, over and over, until his hands blistered. No story deserves worship. He didn't know if it would work. But by morning, the rain stopped, and for the first time in days, the mirror in the square cracked. Just once. A thin fracture across the surface, and though no one saw it fall, something in the spiral blinked. The crack didn't spread. It held, delicate and silent, a hairline thread of disobedience slicing across the mirror's flawless surface. The townspeople didn't notice. Or rather, they noticed, but chose not to understand. They whispered their lines. They knelt. They prayed to the reflection that still shimmered with endless possibility, pretending it hadn't faltered. Denial, Liam realized, was the spiral's most reliable disguise. Not horror, not madness, but willful belief. He stood just outside the square, watching from beneath the overhang of the old bakery. The rain had dried. The streets glistened with leftover fiction, the residue of rewritten memory. If you looked too long at anything, a window, a lamp post, a passing face, it shifted just enough to make you question whether it had always looked that way. The spiral had blurred the town's history so thoroughly, even the past had become suggestion. But the crack was real. Liam had touched it. Late in the night, after the chanting stopped and the mirror's glow dimmed to a soft murmur, he approached it alone. He pressed his fingers to the fault line. It pulsed, not with pain or heat, but with recognition, as if the mirror had become self-aware enough to resent its fracture. It didn't bleed. It didn't resist. It simply blinked. Not literally, not with eyelids, but with a sudden stutter in its surface, like a skipped frame in an otherwise smooth film. The mirror knew it had been interrupted, and that meant the spiral knew, too. Liam didn't sleep that night. Instead, he opened his notebook for the first time in days and wrote the words again. Slowly, deliberately, no story deserves worship. He underlined it. Then he crossed it out. Then he wrote it again and again, until the page blurred with repetition. Not for ritual, but rebellion. If the spiral's power came from belief, then disbelief had to be the antidote. Not hate, not destruction, just refusal. Rejection of the narrative as sacred. A story without unquestioning obedience becomes fiction again. Not gospel, not law. The next morning, the townspeople gathered in the square like they always did. They spoke their lines. But the mirror's reflection was wrong. For the first time, it didn't offer the curated version of their faith. It showed them truth. A woman saw herself screaming in a room with no ceiling. A man saw his hands smudged in ink, covered in words he didn't remember writing. A child looked up and saw his face aging in real time, skin folding in fast forward. They staggered back, some in awe, some in shame, some in horror. The spiral wasn't angry. It was panicking. The crack had let in something new. Doubt. And doubt is the virus stories cannot survive. A single unspoken question can unravel generations of lore. Liam stepped into the square. His clothes were soaked in chalk dust. His voice was hoarse, but steady. "It's not a god," he said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "It's a machine. It wants you to believe it has meaning. But it only repeats." The townspeople turned to him slowly, eyes wide. mouths still forming their favorite lines. Some dropped to their knees again, unsure of anything else to do. Others stepped back, trembling, blinking hard as if trying to remember how they got here. The mirror blinked again. Its glow flickered, then pulsed in warning, and then from the crack a second reflection emerged. Not another person, another version. A Liam, older, tired, mouth sewn shut with threads made of letters, eyes black with unread sentences. He stood in the mirror's background like a prophecy that had been erased and rewritten 1,000 times. He didn't move, just watched, and when the real Liam stepped closer, the reflection tilted its head. But it didn't match his. It moved independently. The crowd gasped. Some fell to the ground, shielding their eyes. Others shouted in confusion. The spiral had made a mistake. It had let them see a version that wasn't them. Not a reflection. A separate entity. A character instead of a mirror. And characters, unlike mirrors, can be wrong. That broke the final illusion. That this had ever been about truth. It was always just a pattern trying to survive. The mirror cracked further. A deep fracture spread from the first, crawling across the glass like a question breaking through certainty. Then another, until the surface looked like a map of broken paths. Still glowing, still humming, but no longer whole. Liam walked forward. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His silence was the loudest rejection yet. And when he reached the base of the mirror, he raised one hand and pressed it to the spider-webbed surface. The glass was ice cold, and then it shattered, not in sound, not in shards, in language. The mirror dissolved into sentences, loose lines, fragments of memory, unfinished metaphors. They swirled around the crowd like wind in a burning library. And as they touched people, some wept, some laughed, and some simply forgot their lines, forgot their reflections, forgot their part in the story. And in that moment, the spiral blinked out. Not dead, not gone, just unwritten. Liam stood in the quiet square, wind lifting the last of the mirror's words into the air. One sentence lingered on the breeze before fading completely. What you refuse to believe can no longer control you. And beneath it all, the silence was no longer hollow. It was free. The morning after the mirror shattered, Greystone didn't quite wake up, it stirred. As if the whole town had been under a heavy sleep and was now blinking in slow recognition. The streets were quieter than usual, but not because people were hiding. There was no fear in the air anymore, only fatigue. The kind that follows grief, or maybe the kind that comes after surviving a fever dream that lasted too long. Doors remained open. Windows stayed unshuttered. But no one spoke in riddles. No one whispered incantations. The words were just gone. Liam walked alone. He passed by the square where the mirror once stood. Nothing marked its place now except a faint discoloration in the cobblestones. A dusty ring of residue, like ash from a fire long put out. The townspeople avoided it, not out of fear, but from an instinctive understanding that some gaps shouldn't be stepped into again. That absence had its own weight and sometimes reverence. He sat on a bench near the bakery. The air smelled normal, warm bread, the sharpness of brewed coffee, a trace of rain that had never fallen. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, Liam didn't feel like a character in someone else's story. He felt present. Alive, yes, but more importantly, unwritten. Children played without chalk. Adults gathered without quoting scripture, and not a single spiral had been drawn since the mirror fell apart. The sickness of meaning had lifted. Not erased, no. The town still remembered. It always would. But memory had loosened its grip. It no longer bled into prophecy. It no longer coiled. Liam opened his notebook. For a while, he just stared at the empty page. Not with dread, not with urgency. He simply looked and waited and let the silence stretch. Then finally, with no voice urging him, no pattern compelling him, he wrote. The story ended before it could make a god of itself. He didn't underline it. He didn't cross it out. He closed the notebook and let the sentence be what it was: final. As the town moved on, so did the days. They passed without incident, without metaphors trying to disguise themselves as truth. Liam still walked, still watched, still listened, but what he heard was life returning to its own rhythm. Not spiral-shaped, not mirror-fed. Just real. Some nights he dreamed of Ava. Not the Ava swallowed by the attic, not the one who bled into paper, but a version of her walking beside him silently, eyes soft, hair tangled by the wind. In the dream, they didn't speak. They didn't need to. The story had exhausted itself. There were no lines left to say. One evening, just before dusk, Liam walked to the edge of town again, to the field where the void had opened and later vanished. The grass had grown back tall, untamed. A few wildflowers swayed without pattern. The space no longer pulsed. It no longer whispered. But as the wind shifted, something familiar brushed past him. Not a voice, not a phrase, just the sense of something watching. But it didn't feel threatening. It felt curious. He spoke softly, to the air, "Are you still there?" No answer. But the wind blew in a straight line. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the stone the little girl had given him so long ago. The one etched with a single, straight mark. He laid it in the grass and whispered, "This is how we end things now, not with spirals, with decisions." He walked back without looking over his shoulder. That night, Greystone slept deeper than it had in years. No dreams reached past the veil. No stories climbed back from the dead. The spiral had run out of ink. It hadn't been defeated, just starved, of belief, of repetition, of reverence. A story without worship becomes a book no one opens. And in that stillness, in that quiet, a new page remained blank, not waiting to be written, but happy to stay that way. It didn't begin with thunder or warning, or even a last breath. It simply stopped. Whatever trace of the spiral had once pulsed in the soil of Greystone, whatever residue had clung to glass, to skin, to language, faded so fully that it left no bruise. It didn't recoil, it didn't retreat. It let go, like a puppeteer dropping the strings mid-performance. Not because the show was over, but because the puppets no longer believed they were onstage. Liam felt it first. Not in a vision, not in a nightmare. In stillness, the kind that wrapped itself around him like a blanket pulled up over his chest. The kind that said you don't have to look over your shoulder anymore. That morning, birds sang without synchronization. Trees creaked naturally. The ground was only earth again. It had no memory of spirals. He stood outside his home. No longer the librarian's house, no longer haunted. Just a place with walls, a place with windows. He looked down at the final page in his notebook. There were no more lines to write. His hand, once atching with the weight of every word he'd shaped, was still, calm. The town around him had changed, not outwardly, but in the invisible ways people carry themselves. They didn't walk like believers anymore. They walked like people rebuilding. Some picked up old trades. Others planted new seeds, unsure of what might grow. A few left quietly, without farewells, heading toward places that hadn't been bent into fiction. And no one talked about the mirror. No one mentioned the names that had twisted inside the spiral's ink. Because there are some stories you leave buried. Not out of fear, but out of mercy. Liam visited the school one last time. The walls were bare, the chalkboards clean. No phrases, no riddles, just space. Children ran through the halls like time had never hiccuped. They laughed like laughter wasn't a relic. He smiled but didn't stay. His final stop was the edge of town. The stone the girl had given him still lay where he'd placed it, nestled in the grass. It hadn't moved. It hadn't cracked. A simple line still etched into its surface. Straight, clean, honest. He knelt beside it and whispered, "You were right." No wind answered. No voice echoed. And he didn't expect one. Because the spiral hadn't been defeated by force. It had been undone by a lack of audience. By people choosing to stop listening. To stop believing. And in the absence of belief, even the most dangerous story runs out of breath. Liam didn't need to stay. not anymore. Greystone didn't belong to the spiral, it never had. It belonged to the people who lived after, who chose repair over repetition. He rose to his feet, turned back for a final look. Houses stood still, windows open, smoke curled from chimneys. Children ran, a dog barked. A couple argued on a porch about whether or not they had milk. Life, not scripted, not perfect, but free. And behind it all, in the places no one looked anymore, in empty basements, abandoned attics, quiet mirrors, it stayed silent. No voice called, no loop restarted. The spiral had become a ghost of paper, unwritten, unread, dead not from violence, but from lack of devotion. And Liam, he walked. No final word, no narration, just footsteps through grass. The end didn't announce itself. It didn't wrap up with a bow. It simply stopped. Like all stories should, when no one's reading anymore.